The name of the uncontrollable swordmaster locked within 4 walls was well known, and because of his confinement, the guy went crazy there. Ghislain Bertium was also considered his father's useless eldest son. However, the strongest knight of the north was defeated by Ghislain. The man admitted that he spent a lot of money making a trap for it. While everything was ablaze, Ghislain slowly walked towards his victim, and he asked the man if he liked this place. Indignant, the knight asked Ghislain if he had known about everything from the very beginning, but the man calmly said that he knew more than that. He also knew how many enemies would arrive, who spied, and who sent help to the knight. In other words, he knew absolutely everything from the very beginning. But the knight couldn't believe it, because he always had an ace up his sleeve. That's why he couldn't admit that someone as untalented as Ghislain could beat him. But not wanting to listen to the knight, Ghislain kicked him. Pushing the man away, who fell to the ground, he told him to shut up. Taking off his helmet, Ghislain said that no matter how many raids they made, he would still win the war. And he said that the reason for his victories is that he knows everything in advance. It all started a year ago in the kingdom of Ludania. Having woken up, Ghislain began to nervously examine his body. Breathing heavily, the boy couldn't believe that he was alive, but he couldn't believe it, because he remembered what happened a moment ago. With a sharp sound, Ghislain's sword plunged into the ground. Bleeding and tired, the boy cursed under his breath, and immediately after that he was struck. When the boy fell to the ground, the swordsman said that now his end had come. The noble swordsman Idun told Ghislain that the war was now over. When the guy was asked about his last words, he only said that he regretted that he was never able to take revenge, and in the end, Idun wished for death. The boy chuckled and said that Ghislain was very arrogant. Suddenly he asked Ghislain about the guy leaving his family after his sister's death. Ghislain simply asked Idun how he knew about this. The guy admitted that he was exhausted trying to track down Ghislain's past, and he admitted that they were working in cahoots with the Dolphin family to overthrow the Ghislain family. Hearing this, Ghislain was shocked. He was struck by the realization that it wasn't just Dolphin's people who were behind that incident. Idun considered the conversation pointless, since Ghislain would soon die anyway. As if driven mad, Ghislain shouted that he would never forgive Idun for this. But the guy just narrowed his eyes and grinned. And then, swinging his sword, he easily cut off Ghislain's head. Shocked by what had happened, Ghislain continued to examine himself, still alive. He thought it was some kind of hallucination, because he even looked younger. Looking back, he also assumed that he could have been handed over to magicians for experiments, and this was all part of the experiment. Suddenly someone entered the tent and Ghislain heard a voice. The knight who entered, Ricardo, told the boy to go out, since everyone already knew that Ghislain had woken up. But when the sword was at the knight's throat, he stopped in fear. Ghislain told the knight that he would remain alive if he obediently answered the questions. However, he warned that he might change his mind. The knight didn't understand what had suddenly come over the guy, but then he exhaled heavily and said that this was too much. Ghislain didn't understand Ghislain's reaction, because he was seriously threatening him. Having broken free, Ricardo said that Ghislain had worn everyone out with his hysteria, and then went to bed. And he was surprised how the guy forgot his hysteria over the fact that he was not allowed to lead the squad to clean up the orcs. Hearing this, Ghislain was at a loss. He thought it was nonsense, but the knight told the guy to come to his senses, because many people were waiting for him. Suddenly, Ghislain asked where they were going, and Ricardo replied that they were heading to Bertium's mansion. Hearing this, Ghislain was surprised. Stopping Ricardo abruptly, he demanded that he repeat it. Ghislain asked if he meant the same ruined mansion. Soon Ghislain went outside and climbed the hill. However, he did not understand why the mansion was intact, since he personally witnessed its fall. Ricardo asked if Ghislain was tormented by nightmares, since calling his own home destroyed was too much. Pulling hard on his cheek, Ghislain thought that he was still asleep. But because of the severe pain, I realized that it was unlikely to be a dream. He looked younger, and the mansion was still intact. And this gave him the idea that the guy had come back. Ghislain remembered that when he was younger, everything in the mansion irritated him. And because of his immaturity, he often created problems for everyone, as a result of which many in the mansion began to turn away from him. Unable to withstand the criticism, the guy ran away from home. And after a few years he became a mercenary, survived many battles and made a name for himself. He then decided to return to his native land to atone for the mistakes of the past, but found only ruins. At that moment he lost everything. But now the mansion was intact, and the people he held dear were here too. The guy couldn't believe it, but inside he was bursting with joy. But Ghislain understood that it was too early to rejoice. Looking at Ricardo, the boy suddenly thought that he could not forget this day. After all, this day became the day when most of the participants in the expedition died. In his past life, Ghislain tagged along with a squad that was told there would only be 3 orcs on site. But on the spot it turned out that there were at least 20 orcs, and because of Ghislain's stubborn desire to become a commander, many of his people died. But now Ghislain understood that the task was doable, because the orcs understood nothing about tactics. As soon as he thought about this, he heard a sharp and loud sound behind him. And then he saw how one of the buildings flew over him and collapsed in front. At that moment, all the knights began to shout that they were orcs. The furious orcs were already advancing on them. Ghislaine turned around sharply and was surprised, because last time the orcs had not attacked in the same way. While he was thinking, the orcs had already begun to destroy everything and attack indiscriminately. Suddenly, the commander of the cleanup appeared and told everyone to take their positions. As soon as he approached, one of the orcs attacked Skoven. The man realized that the sudden attack had taken everyone by surprise, but his thoughts were interrupted by a strange voice. It turned out they wanted to warn him about the danger behind. Reacting much faster than the commander, the guy rushed forward. When he had already approached, the man only turned back. Pushing Skawan aside, Ghislaine prepared to fight the orc. The man frowned, not understanding what was happening. After all, I didn't expect Ghislaine to enter the fight so quickly. With a swing of his sword, it seemed like Ghislaine was able to cut off the orc's arm without much effort. Seeing this, everyone was surprised at the guy's strength. And the orc, bleeding and having lost an arm and a leg, screamed in terrible pain. Unable to stay on his feet, the orc fell on his back. Swinging his sword, Ghislaine concluded that mana was not yet available to him. Walking towards Skoven, he asked the man if he was the commander, and then he asked to give it to him. The man stared at Ghislaine, not understanding what he was talking about, and Ghislaine added that he wanted to take command. For some time after this, the man continued to sit on the ground. He considered it impudent to demand that command be handed over when people's lives were at stake. He stood up and replied that he could not do it. The man explained that even if Ghislaine was the Count's son, they couldn't just hand over power to him. Ghislaine was irritated by this, but he admitted that if he were in Skoven's place, he would have done the same. Suddenly, another orc appeared in front of them. Skoven told the boy to go to shelter, and he would take care of the rest himself, since Gillen had no experience anyway. Preparing to attack, Ghislaine said that he now had no choice. Reacting, the man managed to dodge the sword flying at him. Grabbing Ghislaine by his clothes, he indignantly asked what it was. But hearing a sharp sound, he turned his head to the side. It turned out that Ghislaine's sword hit the orc right in the head. The orc's eyes rolled back in intense pain, and a trickle of blood ran down his face. A moment later, his lifeless body fell to the ground. Skoven was surprised that Ghislaine was able to hit the vulnerable spot directly. Suddenly, Ghislaine asked if Skoven knew what was most important in battle. While they were talking, many orcs approached their frightened soldiers. Ghislaine said that as long as their soldiers were shaking in fear, they would not win the battle, which meant they needed an incentive. With these words, the guy rushed forward, simultaneously pulling the sword out of the orc's head. Taking a running start, he jumped high into the air and found himself above the orcs. Soon he landed on one of them, and in front of everyone dealt the orc a fatal blow. Seeing this, Skoven was surprised. Ghislaine pulled the blood-stained sword from the orc's head, and he told them all to attack him, because he would defeat everyone. The next moment he rushed at the enraged orcs. Easily maneuvering between them, he inflicted mortal wounds on them and moved forward. Watching as body parts flew off the orcs, Skoven wondered if he was dreaming. Skoven had mana, but unlike Ghislaine, he couldn't do anything against the orcs. But he noticed that Ghislaine was already exhausted. Watching the boy, Skoven noticed that Ghislaine used minimal movements to dodge the attacks, and he delivered precise blows only to weak points. Ghislaine resembled a swordmaster who couldn't use mana. Suddenly, Skoven thought that in front of him there might be a real genius. As he continued to fight, Ghislaine said loudly that he hadn't even warmed up yet. While fleeing from the orcs, he provoked them by not living up to their warlike reputation. Everyone was surprised that the orcs were only pursuing Ghislaine. Everyone stared at Skoven, waiting for his decision. He looked down, wondering what Ghislaine was thinking. The attack and attention-grabbing were good, but he started running away, and it seemed that in that direction there was a cliff. Thinking about this, Skoven began to guess what Ghislaine had in mind. However, it was difficult for him to accept such a dangerous plan. Turning sharply, he told the soldiers to raise their shields and form a wall, and he added that they were going after Ghislaine. Meanwhile, the guy ran away from the orcs as fast as he could. He hoped that Skoven understood his plan, because he was an experienced commander. Even though he wanted to cut down all the orcs, he simply didn't have enough stamina, but he was still confident that they could deal with the orcs. When the orcs caught up with the guy, the sound of trampling could be heard behind them. Because of this noise, the orcs began to turn around. Then they saw that behind them the soldiers had formed a wall and were holding their spears in front of them. Ghislaine chuckled and said that it was perfect. Having said this, he jumped off the cliff, and he told the soldiers to act. At the same time, Skoven gave everyone the command to attack. Then all the soldiers rushed at the remaining orcs. Without having time to react, the orcs began to move further towards the cliff. The soldiers did their best to drive off the orcs, and in the end, they managed to do it without any losses to themselves. Having flown down, the orcs began to growl in frustration. When it was all over, the soldiers could finally breathe a sigh of relief. Remembering Ghislaine, Skoven leaned over the cliff. It turned out that the guy had thrust his sword into the rock and was able to stay there. Ghislaine looked at Skoven and grinned. Seeing his gaze, Skovan was at first confused, but then a grin appeared on his face. He held out his hand and told the boy to grab it. However, Ghislain had no strength left, and his hand on the sword loosened, and then he began to fall rapidly off the cliff. Everyone was horrified as they watched the boy fall down. In his sleep, Ghislain heard a familiar voice. Seeing Elena in front of him, he was stunned. His sister was upset about their mother's death, but Ghislain was there and tried to support her. But over time, something changed, and Elena began to say that Ghislain was the worst. All these memories flashed before Ghislain in an instant. He quickly realized that these were memories associated with his sister. But suddenly someone grabbed him by the shoulder. With tears in her eyes, Elena asked him to go with her. After that, he suddenly woke up. It turned out that he was in the middle of the room and lying in bed. After examining his body, he concluded that he was still alive. As he rose, he wondered if it had been a dream. But as soon as he stood up, he felt severe pain throughout his body. The guy realized that these were the consequences of that day, but he was glad to be alive. At that moment, the door opened and someone entered the room. The maid who came in was glad that the guy had regained consciousness. Seeing Valinda, Ghislain froze in surprise. The girl said that she was very worried, and he should have left the orcs to the soldiers. But rushing towards her and hugging her tightly, he interrupted her monologue. Surprised, the girl asked if she had done something wrong. Valinda was Ghislain's personal tutor, and was the only one who tolerated his antics until his last day. But after the fall of his family, the girl was not found, and after that he never saw her again. The girl didn't understand why he was so happy to see her, because they saw each other every day. Ghislain felt he had to tell her the truth. He said seriously that a misfortune would soon befall the mansion, and the girl was surprised, but he also wanted to tell her the most important thing. Ghislain said that he had come back to life after death, and Valinda agreed that he had been dealt a severe blow by the orcs. And then she asked the guy if he knew that misfortune would befall him, and not the mansion. Then she began to scold the guy for his unreasonableness, but he was not surprised. Valinda asked what if he couldn't even go to the festival because of his injuries. Hearing this, the guy froze. Valinda reminded that Elena had been looking forward to the day when Ghislain would take her to the festival, and the maid considered this a good chance to get closer again. Then Ghislain remembered that there was a festival celebrated at this time of year. In the past, due to his experiences, he was unable to enjoy the festival with her. When he asked when the festival was, the girl replied that it was in about a week. Hearing this, the guy thought. Suddenly someone else entered the room. Turning around at the familiar voice, Ghislain was confused. All his life he was haunted by memories that he could not let go of. And within a week his sister was supposed to die. Seeing his sister, Ghislain rushed towards her and hugged her tightly. Watching this, Valinda was surprised. Elena was also surprised, and thought that her brother was playing a joke on her. But Ghislain only said that he missed her very much. The girl pushed the boy away forcefully, and said that he was scaring her. Feeling the pain from her push, Ghislain wondered if she had always been this strong. Sighing, Elena said that it wouldn't change what had happened between them. But Ghislain didn't understand what she meant. It turned out that Ghislain had said a lot of nasty things to his sister recently. Elena was still offended by this, but Ghislain was only surprised. They had not been close in the past, and realizing he was wrong, Ghislain apologized. Surprised, the girls thought that this was all the result of the skirmish with the orcs. But Ghislain said that it was he who defeated them, and not they him. His cries were interrupted by a sharp pain throughout his body. Watching him, Elena said that this was probably why he was dragged into the mansion unconscious. As soon as she said this, the girls laughed good-naturedly. For a moment, Ghislain watched them calmly. And then he smiled, because the people in front of him were the same as he remembered them. In the past, he refused to go to the festival, citing an unsuccessful trip. It was then that he saw his sister for the last time. She was later found in pieces, along with the bodies of her bodyguards. Ghislain blamed himself for not being with her then. Suddenly there was a knock at the door. Then 2 guards appeared, looking for Elena. They apologized for their arrival, and reported that the servants had asked Elena to assess the preparations for the festival. Ghislain asked why they asked Elena about this. Valinda explained that due to the shortage of workers, even Elena sometimes had to work. Watching his sister, he thought that it didn't bother him then, which is probably why he didn't know about it. Suddenly he offered his help. Hearing this, Elena turned to him in surprise. Then the girls were once again convinced that Ghislain had been hit hard on the head. When they got outside, there was a lot of noise. Elena refused Ghislain's help, because no one wanted to work in his presence. Ghislain thought that Elena's body would be found far from the festival, meaning that someone had dragged her there. And to prevent this, he needed to find all the entrances and exits from the castle. Suddenly, someone's voice was heard approaching. When Ghislain saw the man, he recognized him immediately. In front of him was an out-of-breath old man, Fergus. The old man said that he came immediately when he learned about what happened to the detachment. Elena said that Ghislain was acting strange, so Fergus should have taken the boy back. Ghislain had to resign himself to the fact that he would have to gather information slowly. Afterwards, he asked the old man to take him to an abandoned training ground. When asked why, the guy calmly replied that he was going to train. Fergus was surprised to hear this. When he brought the boy to the right place, Ghislaine was surprised. It turned out that the site was better than he imagined. It was a suitable place for his training, one he had not encountered in his years as a mercenary. The old man said that they were monitoring the arrangements of the place, because Fergus was confident that Ghislaine's difficulties would be resolved over time. Suddenly, Ghislaine realized that Fergus had been like that in his past life. Thinking about this, the guy became depressed. He replied that he wanted to live a long life, and that death was not for him, which made Fergus feel as if the boy had already experienced death. Ghislaine replied sarcastically that he had indeed died and then been reborn. When Fergus thought it was a joke, Ghislaine said goodbye to him. Ghislaine reflected on how he had always been hostile to those around him, but in reality he was simply blind. But now he knew he had a week before everything started to fall apart. They discovered that one of the neighboring lords was behind Elena's death, and because of this Bertium got involved in a war that he lost. Ghislaine knew that Elena's death was the starting point for everything. That's why he decided to start fixing it. He decided to start by taking care of his body, even though he didn't have much time. But even so, Ghislaine intended to open the path of mana. Mana was a supernatural force that allowed people to surpass their limits. Unleashing and accumulating mana was considered a difficult task, but Ghislaine could do it even in the midst of battle. All he had to do was sense the mana particles and gather them in one place. For a man who had fought tens of thousands of battles, creating a mana core was easy. But it wasn't only this that allowed Ghislaine to become one of the strongest. This was also due to the method he read in the book he found. And because of this, the guy could create multiple mana cores, and all three were connected to each other. This could have helped restore the lost strength, but Ghislaine's body could not cope with the load. In his past life, he could create 5 cores, but at the moment he could only create 3. This method allowed one to quickly develop one's strength, but in return required a large amount of mana. This was the main reason for Ghislaine's defeat against Eden, because the guy was attacked when his mana was depleted. The technology wasn't the most reliable, but for now it would be enough for Ghislaine. And since he was young and had a lot of time, he was full of the intention of cutting off Eden's head, and also deal with the Dolphin family and their minions. Ghislaine was going to destroy them all. A week later, a festival took place, to which Ghislaine came armed. Elena was surprised when she saw him. She found it strange that her brother had come to such an event for the first time, but he had to do it, since he was a representative of their family. Elena noticed that he had changed, and already knew that he had been training all week. The guy asked what was wrong with the heir of the family training, and Elena reminded him that he had previously said the opposite. Ghislaine was surprised to hear that he wanted to become a lord without ceremony. With a smile, Elena continued that her brother's changes only made her happy. It even seemed to her that the old Ghislaine had returned. Hearing this, the guy was surprised and became quiet. In fact, he realized something this week. Because of the changes in his behavior, the present and future also began to change. Big events were unlikely to change, but he couldn't predict how his actions would affect small events. He was obliged to use the knowledge of the future and come up with the most effective plan for each situation. He also prepared for what was about to happen. He spent the entire evening walking with Elena while she tried street food. Mostly he just went where his sister pulled him. Elena liked everything, although after so many years the festival had started to become boring. Meanwhile, Ghislaine was thinking that nothing bad had happened yet, even though the festival was almost over. Suddenly he heard someone's voices. The knights who arrived said that a new entertainment had appeared not far from here. Elena agreed to go, hoping that it would be fun. And at that moment, Ghislaine realized who was behind it all. It turned out that his family had taken in snakes. Philip and Jamal were trusted unconditionally, because they had protected Elena since her birth. Soon the knights brought Elena to the place they had spoken of. But it turned out there was absolutely nothing there. Then Elena was surprised how one could have fun in such a wretched place. Jamal asked them to wait, promising that everyone would come soon. But Elena was outraged that no one would come to such a place. Paying almost no attention to them, Ghislaine was thinking about his own things. At first glance, it was an ordinary back alley, but there were blockades here, cutting off escape routes. The boy's thoughts were interrupted by his sister's sudden voice. Jamal asked Elena to wait, but she grabbed Ghislaine and was about to leave. Then the brother was indignant that his sister was so strong. Because Elena was looking at Ghislaine, she didn't notice that someone was blocking her path and crashed into him. Philip asked Elena to wait a little longer, but seeing his unnaturally strange face, the girl became frightened. Then she told the knights that they were strange and asked what was wrong with them. Then Jamal told her that they didn't mean to scare her. And then he continued that they simply had an order. Hearing this, Elena began to feel afraid. At that moment, another person appeared ahead. He came here accompanied by 2 others whose faces were hidden. When Frank arrived, he said the job was clean, as expected. Jamal said they had done what was required of them, so it was worth completing the deal. But at that moment, Frank turned his attention to the guy next to Elena. He immediately recognized Ghislaine and said that he had not ordered this guy. Jamal said that Ghislaine was a bonus since he tagged along with them. Then Ghislaine intervened in the conversation and asked Jamal why he thought he could trade them so easily. The knight advised Ghislaine to worry about himself, because they would simply run away far away. Then he admitted that they were already tired of these poor lands. Besides, he knew that everyone was fleeing these lands. Ghislaine got tired of listening to the trader and decided to enter the battle, taking advantage of the element of surprise. As blood gushed from his mouth and wound, Jamal only let out a strangled cough. Everyone else was surprised by the unexpected attack. As the trader's body split into two, Ghislaine said that at least the others hadn't traded the lives of others. And then he turned to Philip. Frightened, the knight grabbed Elena and prepared to draw his weapon. But ahead of him, Ghislaine launched the first attack, instantly killing the enemy. Before his death, he only managed to say that it was unthinkable. Then his lifeless body fell to the ground. The other bandits began to talk about how the Bertium's eldest son had never even trained. However, their leader was sure that it was Ghislaine in front of them. The two knights were distracted themselves, but even so, the guy's attacks were impressive. Trembling with fear, Elena asked what was happening. But Ghislaine did not answer his sister. With a sharp movement, he simply decided to knock his sister unconscious. The guy picked her up and then slowly lowered Elena to the ground. When they thanked him for doing their dirty work, Ghislaine turned around. The man said that they wanted to get rid of the knights anyway, and added that Ghislaine was different from the rumors. The bandit suggested that Ghislaine was deliberately hiding his skills. Taking out his sword, Ghislaine asked what business it was of theirs. Swinging his sword, he thought there were only 3 opponents. The 2 behind weren't a threat, but the leader himself was emitting a lot of mana. Because of this, Ghislaine decided it was better to deal with him quickly. Before this, he asked who had ordered it, but the robber replied that the dead man had no need to know that. Ghislaine was not surprised by his answer, but after that he was determined to get the robber to talk. The man told his men to take the boy alive, but to break his limbs so that he would go mad from powerlessness. With a grin, the man said that in order to create a masterpiece, one must learn a lesson in pain. Having received the order, the 2 robbers rushed forward, but in front of them, Ghislaine looked calm and swung. While the robbers were running towards him, he threw some object at them. The robber immediately recognized the firecracker, but while he was looking at her, he was hit in the face. Having cut the firecracker, Ghislaine plunged his sword into the robber's face. Meanwhile, another one approached the guy from the other side. He tried to attack the guy, but he managed to block the blow. When the sword was stopped, Ghislaine twisted his arm and grabbed the sword. And then he turned around and took it away. At that very moment, he swung his own sword and cut off the robber's head. As he made his attack, he heard a whistle overhead. When his men were eliminated, their leader decided to intervene in the fight. But reacting to his approach, Ghislaine blocked the blow again. The man didn't understand how the guy could block the blow if they were approaching him from a blind spot. Turning around, Ghislaine prepared to strike. Due to his own confusion, the man missed the attack, which landed on his neck. There was a cut on his neck, and his smoking pipe was also cut in 2. But the man's sword continued to move. Reacting to the danger, the guy blocked the blow. Then the man acknowledged Ghislaine's strength, because if he didn't have mana, he would have already lost his head. Ghislaine guessed that the man must have concentrated his mana around him to avoid serious damage. The robber didn't know where the boy got such abilities from at such a young age, but he promised him that Ghislaine would die here. At that moment, mana began to shine around the man. While attacking, he said that with Ghislaine's meager mana reserves, he would not be able to win. And with excitement in his eyes, he anticipated how he would kill the guy. But as soon as he said this, a grin flashed across Ghislaine's face. Noticing this, the man was surprised. At that moment, the guy dodged and avoided the enemy's sword. And taking advantage of the enemy's confusion, he kicked. Having taken the blow, the robber jumped back several meters. Despite all this, he only reminded that with his mana reserves, Ghislaine would not win. However, as soon as he finished speaking, blood gushed down his throat. Due to severe pain, the man fell to his knees and began coughing. The boy's blow was not strong, but the man assumed that Ghislaine had broken through his enchantment. Approaching the man, Ghislaine said that he never even thought that there was such a conspiracy behind his sister's death. And now he was angry when he found out who was behind it. Ghislaine was ready to kill the man on the spot. Feeling an unexpected increase in mana, the robber was surprised by this, but his thoughts were interrupted when the guy suddenly rushed towards him. The man could only admit that his opponent was fast, but he was able to defend himself against Ghislaine's attacks, so their fight continued. At some point, Ghislaine made a powerful swing, and with all his might he struck the robber's sword with 2 swords. The man's hands were shaking, even though he was only blocking the attacks. His sword also slowly began to crack. He had never seen anyone release mana in large quantities before. Because of this, it seemed as if Ghislaine had suddenly become a completely different person. With another blow, Ghislaine finally broke the man's sword completely. Because of this, the attack was no longer blocked, and the robber received a mortal wound. Instantly blood gushed from the huge wound. But this was not enough for Ghislaine, and he prepared to attack again. Then he plunged his sword into the now defenseless robber. The man experienced severe pain due to his body being pierced, but Ghislaine pressed his hand to his throat and pushed him back. Then he invited the man to continue their conversation. Without moving, Ghislaine asked who ordered them to do this. But the robber refused to give up so easily and decided to use a hidden knife. In fact, his target was Ghislaine, and not the defenseless, sleeping Elena. He decided to take at least her with him to the grave, but when he wanted to throw the dagger, his hand suddenly stopped. Binding the man with a spell, Ghislaine offered him a deal. Ghislaine promised to take out the sword if the man did not do stupid things and answered questions. The robber immediately realized that the threads were made of mana, but it was unclear when Ghislaine had managed to make them. In fact, Ghislaine was the one who originally prepared this spell. Clutching the sword in his hand, the guy said that such a warrior would certainly be able to lick his wounds, but the boy knew that everything would be over if the mana core was destroyed. Hearing this, the robber tensed up. At that moment, he felt a strong pain in his body, and then a large crack began to appear in his body. What scared him was that his mana was starting to dissipate. The man said that one wrong move would cause the mana to destroy everything here. Then Ghislaine replied that only amateurs would die, but he would cope. At that moment, the man realized that the guy wasn't bluffing, and looking into Ghislaine's eyes, he realized that he could die. Frightened, he betrayed the Count, who ordered them to kill Elena. He explained that this was how Count Desmond wanted to start a war. After listening to him, Ghislaine did not show any reaction. In a past life, all the dirty work was dumped on families allied with the Duke. Ghislaine asked if that was why they needed Elena, and the man confirmed it. And hearing the answer, the guy thrust the sword deeper. The man, coughing, asked why Ghislaine had broken the deal. Ghislaine chuckled that the robber had killed many. But before his death, he himself had become a coward. But the guy was surprised when he heard laughter in response to this. The man said that his death would not change anything, and that the issue with the degrads had already been resolved. But Ghislaine silenced the robber by force. And then he decided to explain something to him. The guy chuckled and said that he had been reborn after death, and that this time everything would be different. As soon as he finished speaking, he made the man feel severe pain again. As he said, the mana burst out, but Ghislaine remained intact. Breathing heavily, Ghislaine turned to the side. Then he saw Elena, who was fast asleep on the ground. Having thrown away the sword, the guy threw his head back and exhaled heavily. But at that very moment, he felt the blood rush to his throat. Ghislaine fell to his knees and vomited. The guy cursed because his strength had not caused him such a reaction in the past. Looking at the door in front of him, he said that he would not give up so easily anyway. Bursting inside, he saw a pogrom and another body. Ghislaine came there because he knew about this body. And if the robber's words were to be believed, Ghislaine knew whose body it was. Before him was the son of Degrad. After examining the bodies, the guy concluded that they had all been killed and framed as Elena's killers. However, once the death of these people is revealed, war will come. So Ghislaine decided to get rid of the evidence. After burning the building, Ghislaine took his sister and headed away. However, as they were leaving, someone was watching them. And immediately this man decided to report everything. Soon everyone knew that the mission had failed. The robbers were subjected to many insults, but the spy tried to justify himself. He explained that Ghislaine himself had prevented Elena from being killed. Hearing this name, everyone thought of the guy as a useless idiot. Suddenly, someone said that everyone knows what Ghislaine is like, so this argument is unsuccessful. The spy objected that the guy was not at all what they said about him. The rumors were completely different from what he really was. But the spy thought more that there was another person in the boy's body. He immediately changed the subject to Degradov, and said that now it would not be difficult to start a territorial war. The spy asked to give him another chance, but everyone considered him helpless and decided to get rid of him. Suddenly, someone's commanding voice spoke, interrupting everyone. The man asked what kind of chance the robber needed. Then he promised that he would get rid of Ghislaine. He said that he would personally fight the guy, because he had one trump card. Hearing this, everyone involuntarily became interested. And they were talking about Cain Lodges, who was famous for his sword fighting techniques. And since Cain was Ghislaine's cousin, it wouldn't be difficult to pit the two guys head-on. Hearing this, everyone was surprised, but fell silent. Only the one with the most power decided to speak. The man warned that if the robber failed again, there would be no next chance. Arriving at the training hall, Fergus wanted to invite the guy to lunch. But suddenly the old man saw a bright light in front of him. A sudden light appeared, engulfing the sword that stood against the wall. And then he began to carry the sword deeper into the training hall. Ghislaine was able to intercept the sword without any difficulty. Waving it around, the guy concluded that it was not bad. Only then did he notice that someone had entered the room. Fergus apologized to the guy for interrupting his training. But suddenly he asked Ghislaine how the boy did it. After asking what exactly Fergus was talking about, Ghislaine demonstrated his skill again. He explained that the mana threads allowed mana to be used as attraction force. He had used it often in the past, but now he had to use all his strength to use the threads. But if Ghislaine uses only one thread and saves mana, then she will be able to reach the same level. Fergus said he thought he was well versed in his knowledge of mana training, but he had never seen anything like this. But he thought about how Ghislaine hadn't used mana at all recently, and now he had come up with such amazing uses for it. But he remembered that he had something to tell Ghislaine. Fergus bowed and thanked the boy for saving Elena, but the guy said he just did what he had to. Elena admitted that no one believed her when she said that Ghislaine saved her, so she asked her brother to tell everyone, but he refused. Valinda was angry that the two knights had done this, but she thought they had been strange from the start. Ghislaine knew that Elena was keeping a lot of things quiet, but he was pleased that he had at least delayed the war for a while. Ghislaine couldn't stop them on his own, so he needed an army. At that moment, a maid entered the room and brought food. Meanwhile, Ghislaine was thinking that in order to get an army, he needed to have more power. But his thoughts were interrupted when a piece of bread was placed in front of him. At first, Ghislaine stared silently at the piece of bread. Afterwards, he decided to ask Valinda if they had really been given dessert right away. But the girl reminded him that their region was poor. At that moment, a loud voice was heard demanding compensation. A man on the street demanded compensation for damages due to the cancellation of the festival. However, he did not come alone. There was a crowd of dissatisfied people behind him. People were unhappy because they believed that the Count's family was rolling in money. Looking out the window, Ghislaine was horrified by what was happening. Valinda admitted that she knew things would turn out this way. She added that there were many traders in their country who lived off the festivals, and they made a lot of money last year. Now the festival was closing after just one day, so the merchants were outraged. Ghislaine was horrified that the situation was so bad. He understood that if he left things like this, the situation would only get worse. Then he ordered Fergus and the soldiers to pacify the crowd. The old man replied with a smile that there were no soldiers yet. He had to explain that most of the soldiers had gone into the forest to clear out the orcs. Initially, their lands were mired in wars due to raids by invaders, and on the other side there was a forest with monsters. Ghislaine was angry that they had neither soldiers nor money. Then he told Valinda that they needed to talk. He said that since Valinda was in charge of his money, she should have used it to calm the merchants. Then the girl said that this money was not there. With a smile, the girl reminded that the Count had forbidden Ghislaine to give money because he had spent it thoughtlessly. After thinking for a while, Ghislaine concluded that it meant he was a beggar. Then he asked Valinda to borrow some, but she didn't have any money either. After a modest dinner, Ghislaine was in his room and was thinking about how they had nothing left at all. At this rate, even with knowledge of the future, he was powerless. While he was thinking, someone was quickly heading towards him. A knight ran into the room with a loud cry. Ghislaine climbed down from the windowsill and asked what the rush was about. Ricardo said that they had a problem because Cain wanted to see Ghislaine. Hearing this name, Ghislaine was a little taken aback. Until Ghislaine arrived, their guards were getting it. Scoven took all the rage on himself. Due to the beating, Cain's hands were all stained with the man's blood. But paying no attention to this, he continued to beat the knight. The force of the blow even left a dent in Scoven's armor. Skon was already badly beaten when Ghislaine arrived on the scene. Seeing the guy, Scoven trembled, either from joy or from pain. But the boy was stunned by what Cain did to the knight. Hearing the voice, the boy looked away from Scoven. Then he saw Cain, who was much larger than him. Looking down at the guy, Cain greeted the guy. Ghislaine also threw his cousin a dry greeting. In fact, he remembered Cain's face well. He was the heir to the lands of the Lodges, with whom they had an alliance. And even at a young age, Cain proved to be a very outstanding warrior. At that time, Cain was Ghislaine's only friend, but in fact, they were enemies. Slowly, Cain walked towards Ghislaine. Ghislaine asked Ricardo what was happening here. The guy explained that they had been informed about disturbances in a local tavern, and at the place they met Cain, who began to ask if the rumors about Ghislaine were true. The commander began to tell him everything in detail, but then he was interrupted. Cain was outraged that Scoven lied to his face. Ricardo concluded that everything had led to what Ghislaine now saw. Cain said that it was better to tell the truth and not lie about how Ghislaine was able to kill the orcs. That's why Cain decided to teach the commander a lesson. However, he blamed Ghislaine for what happened, since the guy himself was spreading the tales. Ghislaine didn't answer. After all, he remembered that Cain always treated him as if Ghislaine was his lackey. When he caused trouble, no one could say a word to him, because Ghislaine obeyed him. No one dared to look down on Cain, especially Ghislaine, who had suffered from inferiority in the past, and Cain's bold character was perceived as something befitting an heir. Ghislaine chuckled, remembering that he had been criticized even more for this. All the time Cain was watching the guy. He chuckled, remembering that Ghislaine used to start screaming even from such a small provocation. When he was told to kill Ghislaine, he was surprised. In exchange for this, he was promised that someone would provide good support to their family. Ken said that Ghislaine was also an heir, so he couldn't be gotten rid of so easily. He was advised to propose a duel, and chalk it all up to an accident. The man said it would be a good opportunity for Cain. Cain didn't expect to be ordered to kill his own cousin, But without being embarrassed, he decided to get started right away. Kane thought that they wanted to get rid of Ghislaine because they noticed changes in him. He chuckled at the thought. Then he asked Ghislaine what the guy was doing now. Kane said that since he had come, it was high time he brought him what was due. Since they had interrupted the festival, Kane suggested livening things up. After all, he was sure that they were thinking about the same thing when it came to fun. Ghislaine was lost in thought for a while. He didn't immediately understand what the guy was talking about, and asked if Kane meant the same thing. He remembered that Kane demanded drinks and women when he came over. Previously, Ghislaine agreed because he didn't want to be beaten, but now he didn't want to spend the money. He suddenly remembered Valinda's words, and a thought came to him that struck him. Ghislaine thought that the source of income had been here all along, and by that he meant Kane. The guy's thoughts were interrupted by a sharp voice. Kane demanded that everything be brought here, since Ghislaine had already heard about it. Ghislaine agreed, but on one condition. Before that, he wanted Kane to pay his bills. Not understanding, Kane asked what accounts he was talking about. With a smile, Ghislaine said that with interest, Kane would have to pay a whole 1,000 gold pieces. Kane countered that Ghislaine should have thought he was treating a friend. But Ghislaine replied that he was simply wiping his feet on him. Ghislaine demanded that the money be given to the boy until they beat it out of him by force. At that moment, the situation became tense. Ricardo didn't understand why Ghislaine behaved like that in front of him. Standing up, Kane said that Ghislaine was mistaken if he thought he could be insolent. And he said that Ghislaine did not become stronger from spreading rumors about his victories. He squeezed his hand and said that everyone considered Ghislaine worthless because he was full of nonsense. Then Kane decided to join the fight. But Ghislaine was calm in front of him. He was able to easily dodge the fist. Kane immediately launched another punch but hit the air. When Kane opened up, Ghislaine was able to hit him in the side. The blow was quite strong, and it stunned Kane. Then Ghislaine struck again, but Kane was already able to block it. Seeing this, Ghislaine was a little surprised. Suddenly the guy fell to the ground and screamed loudly in pain. A robber ran up to him and asked what had happened. Ghislaine asked him to stop whining, because he saw that Kane blocked the blow. The man asked Ghislaine to leave, and was outraged by what the boy had done. Then everyone started wondering what was causing the noise, and Ghislaine noticed it. Suddenly he realized what Kane was up to. Kane whispered to him if he had played okay. The man agreed that they had done a good job of faking what Ghislaine had started. Then Kane started pulling something out. He was motivated by the fact that upon completion of the order, he would secure support. Besides, it was a good opportunity for him to get rid of the poor Birdiums. Taking out his glove, Kane wanted to challenge the guy to a duel. But before he could finish, a glove also flew into his face. Ghislaine was the first to challenge Kane to a duel. The guy was stunned when he heard this. Ghislaine said that Kane dared to attack him and shame him in front of people, and also beat people. He asked if Kane would deny it. There was silence for a moment. Kane knew Ghislaine was stupid, but he didn't expect the guy to dig his own grave. Taking out his sword, he asked Ghislaine not to regret it, but the guy kept his cool in front of Kane. Then Ghislaine turned to Ricardo. Suddenly Ricardo was asked to bring all the merchants here, and he asked to say that money would soon be found for them. The sudden cancellation of the festival left everyone in a bad mood, but emotions remained high because people were unable to spend their money. Ghislaine decided that a good show would help people let off steam, and soon everything was organized. Their duel opened in front of many spectators. It was only to be expected that people wanted to place bets. Kane was outraged that Ghislaine had turned the duel into a cheap show, and then he warned that his sword would not stop even if Ghislaine began to beg for mercy. The guy remained silent in response. What was said was obvious, because this was Kane's real goal. Ghislaine suggested starting, since there were a lot of people. But suddenly someone interrupted them. The man objected that the bet was unfair. The audience was surprised when they heard this. The bookmaker agreed that no one had bet on Ghislaine at all. For obvious reasons, Ghislaine himself was not surprised by this. People started demanding that at least someone would bet on Ghislaine. Kane chuckled that even at the market Ghislaine was not valued. Then they decided to bet on how long he would last against Kane. But suddenly there was another bet on the table. The beaten Scoven bet on Ghislaine. The guy smiled when he saw him. And then there was another bag on the table behind him. This time Elena and Valinda came up. But seeing his sister and the maid, Ghislaine was surprised. Noticing Elena, those present were also surprised. Elena was told that this would be enough, and Valinda warned her that she was trying to dissuade her. The robber was dissatisfied as he passed by, and Kane was angry that he was being made to wait. When they could start the duel, Ghislaine said that he was older, so it would be wrong for him to go first. Having said this, he prepared his sword, and waving it, he prepared for battle, and then he told Kane that he could attack. Looking at Ghislaine, Kane frowned slightly. Then he said that Ghislaine was late and acting like an elder. In an instant he caught up with Ghislaine, but the guy was able to block his cousin's blow. Kane said the guy had sunk too low to try to save face. Kane's blow caused Ghislaine to lose his balance. He tried to attack quickly, but the guy avoided his attacks. When Ghislaine ducked, Kane went to kick him, but he dodged, so his leg kicked through the air. The observers then believed that Ghislaine would not be able to withstand even one blow. Hearing the support, Kane chuckled. But watching Kane, Ghislaine raised one eyebrow thoughtfully. Valinda was scared and thought that the duel had to be stopped, and the robber was glad that Ghislaine was doomed. After all, Kane had an incredible advantage in strength, and when Ghislaine runs out of steam, Kane will deliver the finishing blow. It was precisely this scenario that led Kane to win his battles every time. In the heat of battle, Kane thought that Ghislaine's skills had improved after all, and then he spun his sword and grabbed it by the blade. When he swung, Ghislaine blocked the blow. But suddenly, Kane pulled the sword towards himself. Grabbing the sword, Ghislaine moved forward with it. Then, with all his strength, Kane threw Ghislaine into the air. Seeing this, the audience was in anticipation, and Ricardo was worried about the guy. Meanwhile, the robber was glad that Ghislaine's end had come. Once in the air, Ghislaine began to fall rapidly towards the ground. However, Ghislaine was calm about what was happening. Upon landing, he said he had been lenient with Kane, but he had crossed the line. With one lunge, Ghislaine caught up with his opponent. When he launched his attack, Kane didn't have time to block it. Moreover, he didn't even have time to follow Ghislaine's movements. The bandit was also surprised that Ghislaine regained his balance by concentrating his mana in his legs. After the attack, the guy exhaled heavily. He said that Kane was poor with weapons and simply intimidated his opponents with his strength. That's why Ghislaine wanted to open his eyes. When Kane heard this, he was beside himself with rage. Not understanding what such a little thing could do to him, he swung again. Ghislaine twisted and kicked Kane. Then he pushed off from Kane's hand and flew into the air. He twisted in the air, attempted to injure Kane, and landed. Enraged, Kane wanted to stab the guy with his sword. But Ghislaine reacted and dodged the blade. He then stepped on it with his foot, thereby restricting Kane's movements. And with his other hand, in which he held the sword, he swung. His attack landed on Kane's unprotected neck. For a moment after that, Ghislaine looked calmly at his opponent, and then blood began to ooze from Kane's many wounds. The people immediately started making noise, because they didn't expect the fight to develop in such a way. Elena proudly asked Valinda if the servant had seen this. Scoven also chuckled quietly. But the robber was angry and annoyed. Kane knew the wounds weren't deep, although Ghislaine had the ability to hurt him more. He didn't understand when Ghislaine had become so skilled with a sword. For a moment there was silence between the opponents. Ghislaine looked at his opponent in silence. But then, to Kane's surprise, he threw away the sword. And he said that the difference in strength doesn't look very spectacular, so he will fight with his hands. Obviously this made Kane angry. But Ghislaine continued to say that he had to take this opportunity to teach him a lesson, and the guy's fists will be enough for this. Hearing this, Kane became a little indignant. But Ghislaine wanted to fight with his fists, because that would give Kane an advantage. He also bet 2,000 gold coins that he would win. Then people started whispering, because the duel had taken a strange turn. The robber was surprised by this. In fact, he was glad that Ghislaine was digging his own grave. At that point, they started accepting additional bets. The murmurs rose again, and many decided to bet on Kane. But there were also those who now supported Ghislaine. However, Kane was only amused by this. Accepting the challenge, he threw off his cloak. But at the same time, he decided to keep the sword with him and attack Ghislaine. Valinda cursed and began shouting in support of Ghislaine. At that moment, Kane had already swung at the guy. The guy just chuckled a little at Kane's complete lack of common sense. He was able to easily dodge the sword. As he did so, Kane prepared to kick. However, having reacted, Ghislaine quickly changed his position. At the same time, he punched Kane in the leg, and then he prepared to strike again. This time, the fist hit the opponent's chin. Kane recoiled in intense pain and fell to the ground. And he didn't understand where Ghislaine could have learned to fight like that. The crowd began to roar, and more people began to believe in Ghislaine's victory. Meanwhile, the guy was telling Kane to get up, because the fight wasn't over yet. Kane gradually began to lose his temper. He got up from his seat and rushed towards the guy. Kane continued to attack with his sword, but Ghislaine still dodged it well. In the heat of battle, he didn't understand why. Just recently, Ghislaine didn't even dare look at him. But now, on the contrary, Ghislaine turned out to be stronger. Twisting Kane's arm, Ghislaine kneed him in the side. Kane was already badly beaten, but he continued to think that he had to kill Ghislaine for the sake of his family's future. However, he could do nothing against Ghislaine and only took his blows. After some time, he was beaten and shaking with pain. Then Ghislaine came up to him and grabbed him by the hair. Suddenly the guy said that he felt sorry for Kane's father. Ghislaine recalled how, because of their friendship, Kane's father helped Ghislaine's family when the Birdiums were on edge. But Ghislaine noted that Kane did not possess such ideals. Hearing this, Kane froze in surprise. Suddenly he remembered how a few years ago everyone had tried to dissuade Kane's father from helping the Birdiums. After all, not even a week had passed since he again wanted to help that family. Kane didn't understand this, and it made him angry. When he asked his father not to go, he stopped. He asked his father why he wanted to help so much if everyone was stopping him. The father silently turned to his son, and then said that he considered Ghislaine's father a friend. Cain froze as he remembered that conversation. At that moment, Ghislaine wanted to hit him again. And preparing to take another blow, Cain closed his eyes. But there was no blow, and Cain's voice was heard. The guy thought that Cain had now learned his lesson. For a moment, Cain stared at the hand extended to him, and then he lowered his head down. He managed to mumble that he admitted his defeat. Not expecting this, the robber was surprised, and the crowd was happy that Ghislaine had won. Ghislaine's family was also happy about his victory. Shouting Cain's name, the bandit ran towards him. He was outraged that he had trusted Cain, and now he was giving up. But Cain just told the man to fuck off and added that he was leaving. The man became angry and considered Cain a weakling. At that moment, Ghislaine appeared behind him and spoke to the man. The guy smiled and said that now it was time to take what was his. The man didn't immediately understand what he was talking about. Then Ghislaine said loudly that the man had volunteered to pay for everyone's meat and drinks. Hearing this, the robber became even more indignant. He said indignantly that he had not given his consent, so the guy should take his words back. But Ghislaine only placed his hand on his shoulder. Ghislaine said that was the price for losing, and it wouldn't even count towards the bet. The guy reminded them that they had to leave 2,000 gold pieces on top. And immediately afterward, he hinted at what would happen to the man if he tried to escape. At the sight of the formidable Ghislaine, the robber became frightened. When he agreed to pay, Ghislaine left him and walked away. The next day, Ghislaine had money. He thought that with them he could hire a small detachment of mercenaries. But since it would take a long time to work off this money, this plan did not suit the guy. Suddenly, Valinda and Elena appeared in the room. Ghislaine looked at them and asked what was the matter. Elena asked sarcastically what Ghislaine wanted to spend them on. And when her brother asked if she needed anything, Elena replied that she was just asking. Suddenly, Valinda said that it was obvious where Ghislaine would spend them. She continued that Lady Amelia's birthday was coming up soon, and Ghislaine probably wanted to buy her an expensive gift. While the girls were babbling about this, Ghislaine himself remained silent. In fact, he was surprised that he had a fiancée. Then the guy decided to ask about it directly. Valinda thought he was pretending on purpose, but Elena replied that he was talking about Count Rayfold's daughter. Hearing this, the guy fell into even more of a stupor. But at that moment, he finally understood who they were talking about. Amelia was loved by everyone for her kind nature and actions. But in the future, she would lead a rebellion to the north, and would be called the Witch of the North. She also participated in Delphine's plan to overthrow the Ghislaine family. So the guy was angry when he thought about this traitor. He asked when his father would return, and was told that he would return in about a week. Ghislaine thought that this time would be enough for him. He was going to visit the Rayfords, but Valinda didn't understand why, since Amelia's birthday hadn't arrived yet. The guy simply replied that he wanted to collect debts. Meanwhile, Amelia's everyday life went on as usual. She asked to accept the new shoes, and she offered them to an ordinary village girl. The girl was touched when Amelia offered her new shoes. Amelia replied that if anyone should walk barefoot on her lands, it should be her. Afterwards, she ordered the guards to provide the people with shelter and food. When the guards began to carry out the order, a noise arose. As she left, Amelia heard a lot of gratitude addressed to her. When she returned home, her legs were looked after. Bernard praised the girl for her excellent work. The girl suddenly said that her father always demanded absolute obedience from people. But she understood that the majority of people followed those who gave them shelter and bread. The man replied that since she had won the hearts of many, he would definitely turn the race for the inheritance in her favor. The girl looked at him and remained silent, and then she kicked him in the face, and she asked what about that duel against the swordmaster from the north. Then Bernard apologized, because if he had won there, he would have been able to attract the man to himself. Afterwards, he kissed the girl's foot and said that his sword would always serve her. But she only asked if that was how she raised him. She grabbed the man's chin sharply, and she said that Bernard shouldn't be a weakling. The man also reported that the trading guild had purchased all the materials for building the checkpoint, and they also bought all the soldiers and knights who left the lands of the Bertiums. Amelia praised him and told him to continue to maintain the image of an ordinary merchant guild. Suddenly their conversation was interrupted by a servant. The man said he had a message from the gatekeepers that Ghislaine had arrived for a visit. Amelia asked with displeasure what the walking problem was doing here. The servant did not immediately decide to answer the girl. And then everyone was surprised to hear that Ghislaine wanted to discuss something regarding the trading guild. Soon Amelia met Ghislaine in the living room. Sitting opposite, Ghislaine greeted the girl. But she didn't answer, and her cat hissed. The girl said with displeasure that it was bad form to come in without warning, and the guy replied that he decided to give her a gift earlier. Showing the flower, he said that he bought it at the guild's facade. And then he said that he had now decided to always buy from the Actium Guild. Amelia remained silent and frowned slightly. And then she jumped up from her seat and said that she didn't quite understand what he wanted to say. She said with displeasure that Ghislaine's gift had been accepted, so he could leave. But Ghislaine dryly told her to return to her place. Hearing his tone, the girl froze in place. Turning around to look at him, she wondered if this was really the guy who had only bleated when he saw her. Ghislaine immediately said that he needed money, 10,000 gold. Hearing such a sum, the girl frowned. Amelia was indignant and asked if this should be taken as the will of his family, but Ghislaine said that it concerned only him. And then he said that Amelia would not marry him anyway. The girl froze and frowned in surprise. Ghislaine continued to say that she would rather marry the knight who was standing behind the door, and also increased her strength. The next moment he was interrupted by the loud hissing of Amelia's cat. Standing in front of the guy, the cat continued to hiss at him, and the girl dryly replied that such things couldn't be said even as a joke. Then Ghislaine promised to keep everything a secret if she borrowed money, but Amelia still refused. When she called Bernard, the man immediately went inside. Approaching Ghislaine, he greeted the boy. Ghislaine knew Bernard as a strong support for Amelia, and he knew that even now the man had strength comparable to that of a swordmaster. Ghislaine said that if he died here, a land war would start, and Amelia said that they would make it look like the walking nuisance was killed by a bodyguard because the guy broke into his fiancée's chambers. Afterwards, she told Bernard to get rid of the guy. Preparing to carry out the order, the man took out his sword. Even though Amelia had gone too far, Ghislaine wasn't surprised. Instead, he also decided to become more serious. Preparing for the fight, Ghislaine also took up his sword. As Bernard watched the boy, he had a smirk on his face. Ghislaine was also looking at Bernard, but suddenly noticed something. There was a sudden movement behind him. It turns out they decided to attack him from a blind spot, but the enemy's sword pierced the back of the chair. The man continued to move forward, and Ghislaine did a somersault. At the right moment, he stretched out his legs and hit the man. There was a crash from the broken window, which caught the man in his chair. Seeing this, Amelia and Bernard were surprised. Ghislaine was outraged that they even sent an assassin to kill him. Saying that their hospitality was terrible, he prepared to fight. Then the swords of the opponents met in battle. Ghislaine said dryly that they didn't teach manners in the Rayfold household. Then Bernard said that Ghislaine was the first to show disrespect, and he believed that he was not entitled to a warm welcome for such a thing. Bernard tried to hit Ghislaine, but the boy dodged. Ghislaine turned around and tried to kick, but missed. Then he kicked with his other leg and hit the target. Bernard stepped back from the strong kick. He knew Ghislaine as someone who had no abilities, but now it was clear that the guy was very experienced. Interrupting his thoughts, Amelia told Bernard to be more serious. She demanded that he move and bring her Ghislaine's head. Seeing her gaze, Bernard froze at first, but then he became serious and prepared to kill Ghislaine. The guy just chuckled that an ordinary knight behaved like that with him. Bernard replied that it was only an invitation to fight. Then both opponents prepared to attack sharply. Bernard was the first to approach, catching up with Ghislaine in an instant. But having reacted, the guy moved back a little and dodged. However, Bernard's attack left a small cut on the boy's cheek. Bernard turned out to be quite fast. Then they began to fight in earnest, constantly avoiding and attacking each other. Watching them, Amelia couldn't understand how Ghislaine could fight on par with Bernard, but suddenly she frowned. Meanwhile, the battle only intensified. Ghislaine blocked the sword that was too close to his face. He then took a step forward and tried to attack Bernard. Luckily for him, Bernard was able to avoid the blow. And then he decided to immobilize the guy's sword. When he did this, he tried to pierce Ghislaine with his sword. But Ghislaine only asked why Bernard was doing it again. Having said this, Ghislaine jumped into the air. But when he did, he noticed that something had changed. A lot of mana started to emanate from Bernard. The man replied that the techniques had not worked on him twice. Then he was able to repel Ghislaine's attack and knock the boy to the floor. The blow was strong and Ghislaine winced in pain. Without waiting for him to take further action, Bernard was about to attack again. But Ghislaine was able to avoid the sword, and then bounce back a few meters, creating distance. He didn't expect Bernard to use mana to counter the move. Suddenly Bernard said that Ghislaine was really different from the rumors. Throwing away Ghislaine's sword, he added that the boy had experience in battle, and not just honed movements in training. He added that such techniques worked well, but not for him. So Bernard was sure that it was all over for Ghislaine. Ghislaine already realized that they had crossed the line. Bernard aimed straight for the head, and in close combat it was difficult to overcome the difference in physics with technique alone. Because of this, he thought that it was not worth bothering with Bernard at all. But Ghislaine only said that he too had little time. Having said this, he prepared to attack. Unexpectedly for himself, Bernard saw mana and threads. He realized too late that Ghislaine would use the bonds. At that moment, Ghislaine's sword had already struck the back of the man's head. With a dash, Ghislaine quickly approached Bernard, and he hit him in the face with his knee with all his might. Bernard staggered back, not understanding how the boy had done it. At that moment, Amelia also began to worry about her knight. Then Ghislaine had already grabbed his sword and was ready to attack. He struck with all his might, but Bernard managed to hold his sword out. Immediately after that, he began to make a U-turn, and he was able to push Ghislaine back for a short time and get rid of his onslaught. Quickly finding his balance, Ghislaine landed on the floor. Then Bernard told the girl that she had better leave. After all, Now he could not guarantee her safety and was going to use all his cards. Ghislaine agreed that this was exactly how he should have been fought. The guy said that he hadn't encountered a worthy opponent for a long time. After listening to Bernard, Amelia began to run away. She was angry that Ghislaine dared to humiliate her. She continued to think that someone had leaked information about the trading guild. And because of the rumors about Ghislaine, the girl thought that he was just lucky then. But now she realized that she had been wrong about him. She wondered out loud what the guards Amelia had stationed were doing. But when she turned the corner, she saw that all her people were defeated. There was a girl standing in the middle who turned around when she heard the voice. Seeing Amelia, Valinda greeted the girl. Amelia asked the girl who she was, but the girl asked Amelia to shut up. At that moment, she suddenly found herself behind Amelia. The knife held to her throat confused Amelia a little. After tearing off the spider, Valinda was surprised that Amelia was still wearing the thing. The girl said with a smile that she thought it was all because of the engagement. Valinda knew that Amelia's family disliked her because insects were constantly following her. So she raised her own to take revenge on everyone, although she didn't know if it was because of trauma or self-affirmation. After throwing the spider away, she told Amelia that it didn't suit the girl. And then she crushed the spider and asked for cooperation. More mana began to emanate from Bernard, almost filling the entire room. Ghislaine noticed that even the air had become heavy. This mana was too much for him. Bernard asked again about Ghislaine calling him a worthy opponent. And then he asked how Ghislaine could consider himself an aristocrat equal to Amelia. Ghislaine confirmed that he was an aristocrat, but he did not understand such a claim from a bodyguard. There was silence for a moment, and then they started fighting again. Continuing his attack, Bernard asked not to dishonor the honor of the aristocracy. The attacks were too fast, but Ghislaine still blocked them. However, they constantly posed a great threat to him. In the heat of battle, he concluded that Bernard was very furious. He constantly harassed Ghislaine with his attacks, but eventually the guy got tired of it. Taking a firmer grip on the sword, he finally threw Bernard's sword away, and then he swung hard and was getting ready to hit the man. But Bernard reacted and decided to attack back. When he did this time he threw away the opponent's sword. Ghislaine was surprised by the force of the last blow, and then Bernard said that this would be Ghislaine's last attack. At that moment, his sword was pointed straight at Ghislaine's neck, but for some reason, his face took on a confused look. It turns out that Ghislaine was prepared to get hurt and intentionally used his shoulder to deflect the sword. Taking advantage of the other's confusion, Ghislaine also attacked. Bernard was angry that with Ghislaine there was no room for relaxation at all, but he was able to deflect Ghislaine's sword again. And then he kicked the guy in the side. The man said there was a difference between someone experienced and someone who swung a sword for show. Ghislaine hit his back against the wall with all his strength, but he could still continue this fight. Ghislaine analyzed that the speed and sequence of attacks allowed Bernard to control the course of the battle, and in a direct clash, he created the appearance that their blades were locked and could no longer be separated. Ghislaine understood that with his current mana, he couldn't defeat Bernard, but this only concerned the mana that Ghislaine had at the moment. He realized that Bernard was missing one thing. After all, I didn't know that Ghislaine had a unique mana cultivation technique. Once he started using it, Ghislaine quickly gained speed, and in an instant he found himself next to Bernard. Their swords clashed again in battle. However, after a few moments, Ghislaine was able to deprive his opponent of his weapon. When this happened, Bernard was in a stupor. He didn't understand where the guy got such mana in the middle of the fight. When the tip of the sword touched Bernard's head, Ghislaine stopped. At that moment, Valinda and Amelia had already entered the room. Amelia said that Ghislaine could take the money and get out of here. Ghislaine asked why he couldn't give the money when he asked politely. Having said this, he removed the sword from Bernard. Valinda said that this could not even be called a lover's quarrel, and Ghislaine replied that they simply did not agree on the matter. Afterwards, he said that he had bad news for Amelia. After all, now he would be satisfied with a sum of no less than 20,000 gold. When Ghislaine left, there was a noise in the palace. In a rage, Amelia continued to smash things around her. Bernard apologized and said that what happened was his fault, but the girl ignored him and said that Ghislaine had changed a lot. Bernard asked if she wanted to report this to Duchess Delphine, but Amelia slapped him, and she told me to watch my language, because Duke Dolphin was a terrible person. And she admitted that she was secretly collaborating with Dolphin because he would help get rid of the Birdiums. But she was more angry about what would happen if the secret of the trading guild was revealed, so they had to kill Ghislaine. After listening to her, Bernard accepted her order, and he reported that Ghislaine had a deep wound on his shoulder and several small cuts, and since he used a lot of mana, he will need time to recover. However, something was bothering Bernard. He said they shouldn't use their knights. Amelia agreed and said that they would need dogs that they had specially bred for this kind of work. Bernard was horrified when he thought about what Amelia was thinking. The girl said to send war orphans without family or status. She asked to collect a dozen that are good at mana control. Meanwhile, Bernard was already thinking about where they could set up an ambush. Having thought about this, I promised Amelia to prepare everything. and Amelia was looking forward to how Ghislaine would pay for humiliating her. Meanwhile, Ghislaine went on his way and bandaged his wounds. He kept thinking about the traitor Amelia. They were worried about Ghislaine, but he calmed everyone down and said that he was okay. He thought that for such a risky act, the wound was not deep. But it was worth it, because now Ghislaine had a large sum. He wouldn't have minded wringing Amelia's neck either, but he didn't want to start a war, since they were already defending themselves from the barbarians. Ghislaine decided to get by with a minimum of bloodshed. And this time, Ghislaine was going to use Amelia. Valinda watched the boy quietly, but suddenly she asked if everything had gone according to plan. She said he told her to take over security if she heard sounds of a struggle and to take Amelia hostage. Ghislaine agreed that this was the plan, but he asked Fergus about it. As soon as the guy said this, he felt a strong pain. Because of her, Ghislaine cowered and made everyone worry. Now Ghislaine understood what the consequences of activating the third core were, and that over time it could create problems. He was thinking about finding a safe way to increase his mana when suddenly Valinda grabbed his hand. The girl decided to check the guy's pulse, and then she said that his mana flow was too disrupted. Then a strange light began to emanate from her hands. Watching the process, Ghislaine began to guess what was happening. But then he again felt severe pain and nausea. But instead of the usual blood, he exhaled a strange air. Ghislaine realized that the congestion in the mana pathways had cleared, and that such healing was possible with deep mana compression. Valinda was brought by Ghislaine's mother, so he guessed that the maid was unusual. But in reality, he didn't know who exactly she was. Although Ghislaine understood that the more powerful allies he had, the better. Valinda suddenly said that she believed in Ghislaine and would always be ready to help, and asked why Ghislaine needed so much money. After a short silence, the guy said that Amelia was the only one who would be able to get the money. Valinda and Fergus were surprised to hear this argument. Valinda said he would be in trouble if anyone found out, but the guy assured her that Amelia wouldn't tell anyone. And then he asked if Valinda believed him. The girl agreed and asked him to tell her how he was going to spend the money. But when Ghislaine spoke about the forest of monsters, Valinda froze in horror. Ghislaine said seriously that they needed resources to clear the forest. Fergus found this unthinkable, since they had tried to clear the forest for a long time, but without success. Interrupting him, Ghislaine asked what happened to the request he had made before leaving. The old man was a little confused by this question, and then he replied that the one whom Ghislaine mentioned was in that very place. Ghislaine replied that he would go to that place immediately, but Valinda insisted on returning home. Then Ghislaine reminded him that Amelia would not just let all this go. Valinda said that she and Fergus had fought well, but the boy countered that circumstances had changed, and now Ghislaine wanted to find a responsible commander. It was for this that they set out into the wild wilderness. The place looked abandoned and no one was opening the door to the house, but they were definitely in the right place. Suddenly the door opened and a man appeared from there. All covered in a beard, he asked who had come. Seeing him, everyone except Ghislaine was surprised. Valinda said that the man looked miserable and did not look like a responsible commander. However, Ghislaine replied that it was the same man in front of them. Closing the door, the man told me to leave and not waste his time. Then Ghislaine addressed Jillian by name, and this made the mercenary captain stop. Afterwards, the man turned to look at the guy, and he saw how, holding out his hand, Ghislaine said that he missed Jillian. Everyone was surprised when they heard about the mercenary squad. The mercenary group Ratatosk was so famous that even after its dissolution, everyone remembered it. And their leader was Jillian, whom Ghislaine now invited to join them. But at that moment an axe flew through the air. He flew past Ghislaine but tore his clothes. The unexpected attack left everyone stunned. Jillian asked sternly how the guy knew about him, and he was interested in why Ghislaine came here. Valinda asked Ghislaine to step aside because she wasn't sure the man was in his right mind, but Ghislaine said he knew how to help Jillian's daughter. Therefore, I suggested that the man talk calmly. The patients experienced fever and coughed up blood. Those afflicted by the disease writhed in agony until they died, which is why the disease was nicknamed Endless Punishment. Experiencing severe pain, the girl screamed throughout the room. Walking up to her, Jillian hugged his daughter. Ghislaine understood that it was not too late. In the past, Ghislaine was unable to hire Jillian because he committed suicide after his daughter's death. And judging by the state of the premises, it was obvious that Jillian spent all the money on the girl's treatment. The girl screamed and said that she wanted to die, unable to bear this pain. Ghislaine understood that there was no time, and decided to begin treatment. However, suddenly someone stopped him. Valinda suggested that Ghislaine leave. She asked how they could help in this situation if even the priests had failed. But Ghislaine broke free and said that he was the one who could help. And then he asked again if Valinda believed him. Hearing this question again, the girl was confused. Then Ghislaine handed her a note. He asked her to buy everything that was listed there. The girl was surprised when she saw the contents of the note. This disease was considered incurable, but in the future a cure was found. And since it was discussed a lot, Ghislaine remembered the preparation of the antidote in detail. The only problem was that the ingredients were expensive. but they had the money for them, so Ghislaine started making them. And when he finished, he handed the medicine to the man. Briefly, Ghislaine said that Rachel should drink it. Without further ado, Jillian gave the antidote to his daughter. At first nothing happened, but soon the spots on the skin began to disappear. There were fewer and fewer of them, and the girl's face acquired a calm hue. When everyone saw this, they were surprised. They were surprised that the marks actually began to fade. Jillian found it hard to believe that the medicine had actually worked. Ghislaine said that everything seemed to work. Jillian asked how this was possible, since even healers with great powers were powerless. Ghislaine said that the power of the saints was not unlimited, and depended on the strength and will to live of the patient. Then the man's hands began to tremble. He asked if his daughter would now be able to be healed. Ghislaine said that she would be healed in 2 months. Hearing this, hope appeared in Jillian's eyes. And then, shocked by what had happened, he fell to the floor. And he asked Ghislaine to tell him what the guy wanted, because he probably didn't come here for no reason. And since Jillian only had his body left, he was ready to become at least a slave. Ghislaine replied that he only needed a true leader of the mercenaries. At that moment, Jillian looked into the guy's eyes, and I wondered what those eyes were really looking for. The man silently took his braided hair with his hand, and in the other hand, an axe with which he cut off the braid. When everyone looked at Jillian, they were surprised. They found it hard to believe their eyes. It seemed as if a completely different person appeared before them. Turning around, Jillian headed to the other side of the room, and he asked if there was anyone else with Ghislaine, maybe enemies. Ghislaine replied that everyone who came with him was inside the room. Then Jillian asked if Ghislaine had any envious people, and the guy replied that there would only be more of them in the future. Grabbing the spear, Jillian threw it at the wall. The spear pierced a huge hole and flew into a tree. Then Jillian pulled the rope that was tied to the spear. In doing so, he dragged the spy inside, and when he grabbed him by the throat, the man let out a strangled cough. Jillian asked him who sent him. The man merely said that this was impossible. Jillian asked what to do with the man, but Ghislaine replied that he should continue to remain silent, since the boy guessed who had sent the spy. Ghislaine admitted that he didn't want to get his hands dirty today. However, the man stopped him from doing so. Jillian said he would take care of it himself. Having said this, he squeezed the man's throat and killed him. When everything was finished, he bowed to Ghislaine. Valinda noticed that there was no doubt in the man's movements, but she didn't understand why Ghislaine needed such a furious man. Meanwhile, Jillian swore that his life now belonged to Ghislaine. Ghislaine replied that he would count on the commander. Soon, Ghislaine's envious people knew that the reconnaissance detachment had been destroyed, but one of them calmed everyone down. Realizing they had been too noisy, the soldiers apologized to the captain, and the captain continued that it was unlikely that Ghislaine would have discovered the spies on his own. Then he found out that it seemed the guy had hired Jillian. This news angered the man, and he grabbed his own soldier. He asked angrily if it was true. Trembling with fear, the man confirmed that he had seen it with his own eyes. The captain was glad that Jillian had finally shown up. Meanwhile, they were moving through the forest, and Valinda complained that the cart was cramped. She said that Jillian didn't deal in weapons, so one sword or an axe would be enough for him. Ghislaine asked her to forget about it, since they needed a cart to transport Rachel anyway. He asked for patience because all this could come in handy. And then she asked if that spy was sent by Amelia, and after hearing confirmation, she said that it was problematic. After all, the man was wearing a mask typical of the Wild Cat Guild. Ghislaine knew that that guild was illegal. They were smugglers, killed people and dealt in drugs. Valinda said that they were a powerful dark guild, as there were often retired mercenaries among them. That's why she told Ghislaine to be more careful. But I heard from Ghislaine that there was nothing to worry about. After all, Ghislaine now relied on Jillian. They continued on their way when someone suddenly approached them. Jillian immediately noticed the enemies. Meanwhile, they had the cart in their claws and were aiming at Jillian. However, the man reached for the weapon that was on his back. Taking up his sword and axe, he blocked both blows. And then he was able to attack the killers. He even cut one of them in half. Their bodies fell to the ground, and the cart continued to move on its own. Then the other people sitting in the trees cut the ropes. And at that moment, a tree began to fall on the cart. Valinda screamed that it seemed like they were about to be caught. However, with a tug on the reins, Jillian changed the direction of the cart. The cart stopped and the tree fell not far from it. Ghislaine wasn't surprised that they were ambushed. Meanwhile, the cart was surrounded by dozens of people. One of them turned to Jillian, and hearing his name, Jillian looked at the squad leader. The killer called Jillian a coward who disbanded the gang because of his daughter. As he stepped down from the cart, Jillian said he couldn't make out the words. The killer continued that because of Jillian, his life had gone downhill, and Jillian couldn't even recognize her old friend. Jillian remained silent. The commander then assumed that Jillian was pretending not to recognize him. Then he ordered his men to join the battle. Ghislaine offered to help, but Jillian refused. When everyone attacked the man, a lot of mana started to emanate from him, and in one instant he cut down all the enemies. However, the others were not frightened and continued to advance. Having blocked the weapon, Jillian used an axe to cut open the killer's body. He cut off the next man's hand and struck him in the neck with an axe. He also easily blocked the next killer's attack, and with a swing of the axe he chopped off his hand. The captain noticed that Jillian's strength had not gone away. Then he ordered the detachment to split up and approach from two sides. Reacting, Jillian jumped on his horse. While everyone was in confusion, Jillian grabbed the weapon left on the horse, and then waving his axe he ran forward. To give the blow more force, he grabbed the weapon with both hands, and he attacked several people at once. Then one of the robbers said that someone should scare the horse. But without giving them a chance, Jillian continued to kill everyone. Watching this, Valinda was even a little horrified. At that moment, one of the killers decided to attack the man from above. But having reacted, he covered himself with a shield. The captain said that Jillian could at least not interfere with the person whose life he was ruining. And then he swore to kill the man. Jumping back, he attacked the horse. Due to severe wounds, the animal immediately fell to the ground. When Jillian landed, they immediately tried to attack him. But he was able to block the blow with his axe, and he hit the man in the side with his shield. After that blow, the assassin jumped back several meters. He was surprised to hear that Jillian was no longer the leader of Ratatosk, and he asked who it was if not Jillian. Jillian replied that he had left the past behind and was now nothing more than Gislin's assistant. This only made the killer even more angry. He rushed forward and once again promised to kill Jillian. Afterwards, a fight broke out between them. Jillian easily blocked the blows with his shield. The killer said that with Jillian's departure, the squad disintegrated, and because of him, the killer lost his purpose in life. Jillian had no answer to that. He continued to fight the mercenary in silence. However, he was also strong and avoided Jillian's attacks. Swinging his leg, the man was able to hit the shield. Then the shield couldn't withstand the pressure, and a hole appeared in it. He continued that he dedicated his life to the unit, and put everything he had into it. And Jillian traded everything to become someone's dog. For this, the assassin could not forgive his former comrade. Having said this, he threw daggers at Jillian. The shield was useless, so the man began to fight back with his weapon. When he dodged the blades, the killer appeared in front of him. However, Jillian reacted by stepping back and avoiding his attack. He tried to attack, but the killer was also able to avoid the attack. Meanwhile, the man looked at Jillian as if he were mad. He admitted that Jillian had been strong before. But while Jillian was worried about his daughter, the mercenary continued to work on himself. So now Jillian was no match for him. The assassin kicked the blades that were stuck in the ground and pointed them at Jillian again. But he blocked them with his hand. As he did this, the assassin approached Jillian again. Noticing him, Jillian swung, but he was able to jump and dodge. By attacking Jillian, the mercenary wanted to end it. However, Jillian intercepted his knife with his bare hand. And finally, he asked if this was really the whole reason for revenge. At that moment, the mercenary realized that Jillian had not been fighting at full strength the whole time. Just as he thought this, something heavy hit him in the face. After this blow, he was thrown back. The mercenary's flight was stopped by the tree he crashed into. Suddenly, Jillian said he didn't understand. After all, the mercenary had plenty of opportunities to take revenge. Jillian asked why the mercenary hadn't come for him earlier. The man laughed because Jillian didn't know. The man said that he was the one who came. But he found not a leader, but an old man with whom he was sick of getting his hands dirty. He asked where Jillian, whom the mercenary had previously idolized, had gone. Jillian threw the blade into the ground, and he said that now he serves another. But now he was going to do his old comrade a great honor. Just like Commander Ratatosk, grabbing the sword, the mercenary wished for a real fight to begin. But Jillian easily blocked his blow. But the mercenary shouted that this was exactly the fight he had been waiting for. They attacked each other with lightning speed. Jillian lunged and tried to attack, but his attacks were dodged. The same thing happened when the mercenary tried to attack. But finally one of them gave up and Jillian was able to attack the mercenary. The man's face was contorted by severe pain, but he continued to fight back. At some point, Jillian swung his axe, and he said that he remembered the captain of the 5th Squad, Ratatosk, and he even addressed Viego by name. Hearing this, the man grinned. After that, Jillian killed him. For some time, he stood over the body of his dead comrade. Suddenly, someone praised him for his efforts. Valinda and Ghislaine approached him, and the girl babbled that they would make good money from selling these things. Jillian apologized for dragging out the fight, but it was nothing to Ghislaine. In fact, Jillian exceeded all his expectations. In the past, stories about Jillian began his rise as the king of mercenaries. Suddenly he asked Jillian if he remembered that man. Jillian confirmed that it was his former comrade. Hearing the word comrade, Ghislaine thought. Suddenly he wondered what his comrades were doing now. Before meeting them, each had their own life. One day, Ghislaine was going to gather them again. 2 days later, they arrived in the lands of Birdium. Jillian asked if these were the same lands, and Ghislaine briefly confirmed this. The guy thought that it was nice when you could return to something, because in the past he didn't have that. Continuing to look at Ghislaine, Jillian remained silent. Then Ghislain asked the man what he thought of their lands, and he replied that they were not bad. And Ghislain agreed that they sucked. Jillian had heard that these lands were constantly at war with barbarians. But everything turned out to be worse than he expected. Ghislain wanted to solve these problems, so he asked Jillian for help. The battle was expected to be long, but the boy was determined to restore the lands. Suddenly, Valinda saw something ahead and screamed. Looking into the distance, Ghislain's gaze also acquired a hint of surprise. Ahead, he saw the man who was his father. The castles discussed how best to use the available forces. But some believed that the Wraithfolds were not helpful, as they reported that they attacked soldiers. Ghislain listened to all this conversation in silence, and with a grin he thought that nothing had changed. Although he was now a young gentleman, he had decades of experience. Then the guy told everyone that they had worked hard, and then he turned to his father. The father looked sternly at his son. Ghislain remembered that as a child he was afraid of his father because of his stern face. But now he understood why his father was like that. It was because of the burden of responsibility that was placed on the father. Father asked where Ghislain had gone for a week. The guy replied that he had gone to see the Wraithfolds. The father asked if he had caused them any trouble, but the boy replied that he had not. Then suddenly one man said that Ghislain won money in a duel with Cain, and then the man asked if the young man had managed to spend them yet. Ghislain replied that he had simply gone to resolve a matter with Amelia. Another man took up the point and reminded him of the responsibility that Ghislain had as the heir. Then the count interrupted everyone. Ghislain heard from him that there were still problems. He asked if it was true that Ghislain had killed Jamal and Philippe, who were trying to sell Elena. Ghislain immediately remembered those nights. Another man said that Ghislain probably couldn't handle them, so he pitted them against each other. The knights were traitors, but Ghislain understood that no one was happy about the death of the knights. Ghislain said that was roughly what happened, and the man was pleased with his own insight. Suddenly Ghislain heard praise. Father said the most important thing was that Elena was safe. Ghislain was surprised, because it was the first time his father had praised him. Then he decided to ask his father for a favor. One man said that if it concerns salary, then this will not happen. Another agreed that Ghislain had too many sins. In his anger, he even began to list them, and Ghislain had nothing to answer, because it was the truth. Ghislain replied that out of politeness he wanted to ask his father's permission, but he would still carry out the plan. But he refused to tell Valinda about this for now. After all, he understood that if there was a leak of information, there would be problems. He knew that in the monster forest there was a place where there were many rune stones. This mineral was imbued with magic, and that is why everyone went crazy about it. It was often used to create various instruments. In general, everywhere where magic was used. In the past, the Delphin family took over its deposits. But since he knew everything in advance, he wanted to change it. But Valinda didn't like being in the dark. And yet she agreed to do everything as Ghislain said. And when he asked to hire an army, Jillian asked the guy if he was sure about this, because it would attract attention. But Ghislain knew the right people, and even wanted to conduct a selection among them. Jillian guessed who Ghislain was talking about. Even though those mercenaries were strong, if they were not satisfied with something they would tear you to pieces. But even so, Ghislain wanted to hire the Cerberus mercenary squad. The next day they went to tame these dogs. Their camp was located on the outskirts of the lands. As Jillian and Ghislain approached their camp, they were spotted. The mercenaries chuckled at the fact that it seemed the travelers did not know where they had wandered. One of them said that they looked like ordinary aristocrats, but when he looked through the telescope again, he saw a sharp movement. A terrible scream was heard, which attracted the attention of all the mercenaries. Jillian suddenly approached one of them and grabbed him by the head. He began to squeeze the poor guy's head with force, but then he waved his hand, and he launched the mercenary into flight. Seeing Jillian's strength, all the mercenaries became wary. Realizing that something was wrong with the old man, they grabbed their weapons and surrounded him. Suddenly someone said that even an aristocrat should not have come to them like that. The man warned the travelers that they would not leave alive, but suddenly the grin disappeared from his face. It was all because Ghislain approached them. The guy asked them who was in charge here. Then the man walked towards the guy. When speaking with the mercenaries, the aristocrat surprisingly behaved boldly. But in the end, the mercenary grinned. He told everyone that they were looking at another crazy aristocrat. And then he swung his weapon, and he threw it at the guy with all his might. When the heavy object approached him, Ghislain did not show any reaction. Suddenly, the weapon changed its direction. It's because Jillian intervened. The man was surprised that the chain link could be pierced with a sword. Ghislain guessed that he would not be understood in a good way. He told Jillian to act as he saw fit, but not to kill the mercenaries. Having accepted the order, the man pulled the chain. The owner of the weapon also pulled himself along with the chain. With all his strength, Jillian was able to throw the man up into the air, but suddenly the chain wrapped around his neck. Using mana, he struck the mercenary. When the man was no longer able to fight, others rushed into the fray. However, Jillian picked up the man's body, and then he threw it at the mercenaries advancing towards him. They all fell nearby with a crash. When they were finished, Jillian turned to look at the others. Looking into his eyes, the others were frightened. Dismounting from his horse, Ghislain asked how much longer he would have to wait. He asked to finally bring the boss to them. Suddenly, some guy said that before that, he had been sleeping peacefully. Kaur introduced himself and asked what Ghislain needed. Ghislain replied that he wanted to hire them, but Kaur was outraged that he had beaten his men before that. He said calmly that aristocrats should know manners, but Ghislain said it was a greeting and the best way to make them obey. The boy chuckled and asked if Ghislain would commit a massacre next time. Afterwards, he agreed to consider the guy's proposal. Ghislain replied that the conversation would be about the forest of monsters. That's why he needed mercenaries. Kaur asked who Ghislain was to invade such territory. Then Ghislain introduced himself to him, and having learned of his identity, the mercenaries fell silent. Afterwards, everyone burst out laughing and said that now his antics were not surprising. Afterwards, Kaur said that there was no place for people like Ghislain there, and he didn't even want to listen to anything else. At this point, he considered that the negotiations would be finished. Ghislain was silent for a moment. Suddenly, Kaur was asked if he was really scared. Ghislain chuckled at the fact that the rumors about their squad were apparently being inflated. Then Kaur changed his mind and suggested discussing the price, since they were mercenaries first and foremost. Ghislain merely said that weaklings always looked for excuses. Kaur said that he could have played with him, but Ghislain's provocation ruined everything. So he asked Ghislain to pay for the damage and leave. But Ghislain did not agree with this. He asked for Kaur because he had Moriana's confession. Kaur asked the boy if he knew what it meant, and Ghislain replied that of course he knew. This was the name of a traditional duel in the world of mercenaries. The participants had to fight without mana, and their working hands were tied together. The duel is also held in a circle which cannot be left. There have been many cases where both participants ended up dying. Ghislain knew that the loser had to obey the winner. He offered Kaoru a duel. Jillian was surprised that Ghislain wanted to follow the customs of mercenaries. Refusing a duel was considered dishonorable, so Kaur could not refuse. As they waited for his answer, tension grew between everyone in the room. Finally, Kaur said that if the master desired recognition in the mercenary style, they should respect that choice. In the shortest possible time, everything was prepared for the fight. Having bandaged their hands, the opponents entered the circle. Jillian watched silently as the mercenaries shouted in support of their leader. Kaur told Ghislain that if the guy learned a couple of tricks, it would not allow him to win, and there was no turning back. When Ghislain was suddenly pulled forward, he didn't expect it. Pulling the boy towards him, Kaur informed him that he had won like this 5 times. After listening to him, Ghislain moved away, and having said that such a quantity was not enough, he also pulled the guy towards himself. And he replied that he had won like this hundreds of times. When they heard the signal to start, their views immediately changed. In an instant, they pointed their blades at each other's throats, and at the same time they were able to dodge the attack. Looking at Ghislain, it seemed that confusion could be read in his gaze, because he did not expect such a reaction from an ordinary aristocrat. Their attacks were identical. Whenever someone tried to attack directly, the other would always block the attack. In an attempt to make Ghislain lose his balance, Kaur pulled the boy by the arm. But even with his provocations, Ghislain managed to hold his ground. And when Kaur tried to attack from behind, Ghislain ducked in time. After this, he immediately tried to attack the leader of the mercenaries, but he also successfully avoided the attack. Then Kaur decided to kick his opponent. Ghislain reacted to this attack and blocked it with his own leg. But the moment after blocking the attack, he felt pain in his leg. Kaur noticed that the guy was holding up well, but it was strange that he had won hundreds of times if even winning once was hard. After attacking, he told Ghislain that if a guy wants to brag, he should come up with something plausible. The crowd shouted in support of Kaur and called for him to kill the aristocrat. But when Jillian looked menacingly at the mercenaries, they immediately fell silent. Having subdued the mercenaries, the man continued to watch and reflect on the fact that the fight was unfavorable for Ghislain. The circle was too small even for one person, and mana could not be used, so everything was decided by the person's weight and physical abilities. His bound hands further restricted his mobility, and Ghislain could barely block Kaur's attacks, and this meant that Kaur could easily seize the initiative in the battle. But if things got too dangerous, Jillian was ready to step in. Grabbing Ghislain by the arm, Kaur prepared to attack the guy in the side with a knife. However, when he swung, Ghislain jumped over the guy, and without difficulty he was able to land on his feet. But at that moment he again noticed the pain in his leg. Now he was convinced that without using mana, the pain would accumulate in the part of his body that he had used to block the blow. Kaur noticed that judging by Ghislain's face, things were bad for him. He also thought that Ghislain's attempts to resist were pathetic, but he was the most stubborn nobleman Kaur had ever met, and Kaur was sure that he knew what Ghislain was thinking about now. This fight was a manaless confession, so as long as Ghislain kept blocking attacks, the damage would only accumulate. Ghislain already felt his leg starting to cramp, which was clear from his face. But Kaur wanted the boy to continue fighting, because it would only make things more fun. Twisting the blade in his fingers, Kaur grabbed it differently. He then launched a punch that Ghislaine was able to block. When Kaur tried to attack the head, Ghislaine ducked. Kaur changed the direction of his hand to follow Ghislaine's head, and then Ghislaine blocked his opponent's hand with his own. Taking the initiative, Kaur was able to block Ghislaine's hand, and then he tried to kick, but Ghislaine reacted, and like last time, blocked the attack with his leg. When he did this, he felt a sharp pain in his leg. Then Kaur said that it was time for them to finish. Pointing the blade down at Ghislaine's neck, he was about to kill the boy. As Jillian had intended, he drew his axe. However, at that moment, a smirk appeared on Ghislaine's face. Unexpectedly, he was able to dodge Kaur's blow. Afterwards, he changed the position of his body and prepared to attack. It was then that blood was spilled for the first time in the duel. Seeing that he had a wound, Kaur froze for a moment. Everyone was just as surprised to see this. Kaur swung and wanted to strike again, but Ghislaine dodged. He made another swing, but the guy also avoided it. And then Ghislaine counterattacked, wounding Kaur in the chest. Kaur was cut for the second time, and this caused confusion in the crowd. The mood started to change a little, as everyone thought that Kaur was dominating. Kaur attacked again and missed again. And immediately after that, Ghislaine hit him with his shoulder. And immediately after that, he struck me several times with his fist in the face and neck area. And raising his hand up, he suddenly lowered it and thrust the knife into Kaur's hand. Enraged, Kaur began to attack quickly. He didn't understand what had changed, because just recently Ghislaine had barely been holding on. Jillian was constantly observing and analyzing, so he was able to understand everything. The forceful jerks overstrained his muscles, and in his attempts to seize the initiative, Kaur gradually lost his mobility, while Ghislaine, on the contrary, acted calmly. Jillian hadn't thought that the weight advantage could be overcome in such a way. Suddenly, Kaur heard from his people that they were getting bored, so something had to be done about Ghislaine. Ghislaine said that Kaur's resilience was impressive, as many would have already given up and used up their mana. But Kaur replied that anyone who broke the rules of this ritual had no right to be in the world of mercenaries. Grinning, Ghislaine admitted he was impressed. Kaur also suddenly admitted that in terms of skills he was inferior. However, he said that the victory conditions were not limited to that. He turned around abruptly and pulled Ghislaine towards him. The one who crossed the circle's boundary was declared the loser. No matter how skilled Ghislaine was, if he was thrown out of the circle, he would touch the ground. With such thoughts, Kaur was confident that victory was his. However, quickly turning around, Ghislaine changed the position of his free hand. At that moment, he had almost touched the ground. But before that happened, he was able to kick Kaur with both feet, and since their hands were tied, he was thus able to return within the circle. Then Kaur began to lose his balance, and this allowed Ghislaine to knock the mercenary leader to the ground. At that moment, it turned out that Kaur had gone beyond the circle. Kaur was angry that the fight was lost. Ghislaine told him that victory was his. Kaur asked the guy who he was and where he got such skills. But suddenly Ghislaine replied that Kauru lacked respect for his master. He lifted Kaur up abruptly. This confused Kaur, and he replied that the fight was already over. But Ghislaine replied that this was not so, since he himself had not yet left the circle. And he decided that now was the time to train his new subordinate. This was immediately followed by a strong blow to Kaur's face. He fell to the ground again, and those watching were surprised by what was happening. Kaur tried to stop the guy and remind him of the rules. However, he didn't have time to finish, because Ghislaine attacked him again. And then he asked if Kaur would also explain the rules on the battlefield. When Kaur wanted to object, Ghislaine replied that one could not doubt the master's words. Kaur wanted to call the guy crazy, but again he didn't have time to finish. The beatings continued for some time. The others didn't know whether they should intervene, so they just stood aside. Then Kaur shouted, asking Ghislaine to stop. As if hearing him, Ghislaine pulled Kaur towards himself and lifted the boy from the ground. But he only said that Kaur had not yet left the circle. Then Kaur looked straight at Ghislaine, and turning to his people, he told them to kill Ghislaine. Without hesitation, they grabbed their weapons and were ready to carry out the order. But at that moment they saw Jillian in front of them. He sternly told everyone that he would kill anyone who dared to touch Ghislaine. Everyone trembled with fear and did not dare move from the spot. Watching this, Kaur realized what a hopeless situation he was in. Trembling slightly, he turned his head to the side, and he met Ghislaine's gaze, who invited him to continue. As the boy swung his fist again and was about to hit Kaur, he smirked. It was as if Kaur no longer tried to resist and simply endured the beatings. At that moment, he remembered what pathetic cowards the other nobles were. As soon as he intimidated the narcissists and the arrogant, they immediately began to grovel before him, and Kauru took great pleasure in emptying their pockets. This is how he earned his reputation as a mad dog, by demonstrating his strength. But now he didn't understand how he could have screwed up so badly with the wayward Ghislaine. The whole ground was stained with blood, and Kaur did not move at all, which made his people worry about him. Then Ghislaine wondered if this would be enough. Suddenly he turned to the mercenaries standing nearby and told them to bring bandages and compressors. He explained that if Karu wasn't helped, he would die. Hearing this, the mercenaries came to their senses and were ready to carry out Gislin's orders. Silently, Jillian turned to look at the guy. He assessed what was happening with a stern look. The mercenaries now obeyed Gislin's order in an instant. In the world of mercenaries, the fist was mightier than the law, and Ghislaine was able to stamp his authority in the most effective way. When Kaur woke up, Ghislaine handed him a paper. Pointing to it, he told Kauru to sign it. At first, the mercenary didn't answer and only looked at Ghislaine, and then he just clicked his tongue in displeasure and signed the paper. When he finished, he sloppily handed the paper back to Ghislaine. However, when Ghislaine saw this, he did not like Kaur's tone. He considered it disrespectful. Kaur involuntarily turned his head to the side and asked Ghislaine to take care of them. Ghislaine agreed and grabbed Kaur's hand, which immediately scared the already beaten boy. But Ghislaine shook his hand and said that they were now family, and this meant, in his understanding, that they must act together. A couple of days later, the mercenaries gathered on the outskirts of the Birdium lands. The mercenaries did not understand why they were gathered so early and complained that they only had time to eat. Then one suddenly said that they were being hired by the heir to the Duchy of Birdium. Many began to discuss how they could simply take money from the young man. But there were also those who silently listened to the conversation. Suddenly, one mercenary said that they needed a representative who would communicate with this pseudo-employer. Many were surprised when they saw Gordon. The man confirmed that they had not made a mistake, and added that he could not help but notice how valiantly they tried to make their lives easier. The mercenaries replied that last time some idiot made inappropriate demands, so everything went in the same direction, and Gordon suggested simply not to cross the boundaries of reason. He offered himself as a representative who would slightly intimidate the employer, and the rest would simply have to agree with him. Many agreed, because they thought that as long as Gordon was talking, they would have everything under control. But their conversation was abruptly interrupted when someone announced that someone was coming towards them. Then a man appeared on the horizon. It soon became clear that this single rider was Ghislaine. They recognized the guy by his clothes and chuckled at the fact that he came here alone. Gordon waved his hand at the rest of the mercenaries and told them to be responsible for the atmosphere, and he himself was going to teach the noblemen a harsh lesson. However, as soon as he showed this, his companions appeared on the horizon, in addition to Ghislaine. The guy brought other mercenaries with him. By their elongated helmets, someone was able to recognize the mercenaries from the Cerberus squad. But it was not yet clear what had happened to these rebels, since they were so humble before the aristocrat. Soon all the riders approached Gordon. Ghislaine slowly looked around at the mercenaries in front of him with an appraising gaze. Turning to Gordon, he asked the man if he was the leader. Having received an affirmative answer, Ghislaine asked the mercenary what his name was. Looking up at Ghislaine, Gordon introduced himself hesitantly. Hearing his name, Ghislaine froze for a moment and continued to look at Gordon. And then he lightly punched Gordon and said that it was impressive. Afterwards, Ghislaine also introduced himself, and the fact that he really was the heir of Birdium surprised everyone. Turning his horse, Ghislaine ordered all the soldiers to be gathered, and over his shoulder he explained that they would go to clear the forest of monsters. Soon Ghislaine was preparing for the campaign and putting on his armor. At that moment he thought that all preparations for clearing the forest were completed. A temporary base for the expedition was also established and supplies were provided, and the troops were ready. When the equipment was on Ghislaine, he went out to his people. Then he asked Valinda to recount. It turned out they had 150 mercenaries and 40 fighters from the Cerberus squad. After listening to her, Ghislaine asked if she had clearly conveyed her position to Scoven. Valinda thought he would object, but the knight even volunteered to cover their entry into the forest. Afterwards, Ghislaine ordered everyone to line up. Pointing his finger at the forest, he said that they would have to clear this forest. The guy said that surely everyone had heard about what lurked in this forest. Monsters, secrets, and something even more terrible. Upon hearing of their goal, many began to worry that they might not return alive. Valinda was outraged that they were talking during Ghislaine's speech and reprimanded the mercenaries. Ghislaine said that he was not holding anyone back, but if he succeeded, he would pay triple. Hearing this, everyone could not believe such a payment. Valinda was immediately indignant, because in fact they had spent all the money on preparations, and Ghislaine replied that he said this for motivation. But he still knew that if he succeeded, it would all pay off. Again the guy turned to the maid and asked with a grin if she believed him. Sighing heavily, the girl replied that she had to. Kaur also chuckled, noting that the promise was ridiculous, and how Ghislaine would get out of it was unclear. Then Ghislaine shouted loudly, addressing his soldiers. Waving his hand towards the forest, he ordered them to move out. Soon everyone got to work and began cutting down the forest. There was a lot of work, so even Ghislaine took on the task. When he cut down the tree trunk, he kicked it so that it fell down on its own. Then he was glad that sunlight was finally beginning to enter the forest. Turning to the people, he ordered them to continue clearing the way. Ghislaine recalled that he had read from Dolphin's notes in the past that the forest was very vast, and that one day it would be possible to drive out all the evil spirits from there. But now it was more important to focus on the money and on the need to pave the way to the vein. And in order to thwart Bertium's envious people, this prophet was very important. Kaur noticed that even Ghislain decided to get his hands dirty and chop down the forest. The mercenaries couldn't understand whether he was setting an example or just showing off in front of them. Overhearing their conversation, Valinda reprimanded them again and ordered them to get to work. She was angered by the way the mercenaries treated their work and Ghislain. Then she asked Ghislain why he worked himself if he hired so many people. Because they might start looking down on him. Ghislain said it didn't matter, because the more people worked, the faster things would go. Valinda didn't argue with him, but she did notice that it felt like Ghislain knew everything about this place. Kaur chuckled that the lady was worried about her employer, and they were dogs being driven to hell. At that moment, Jillian turned sharply and hit Kaur with the log he was holding in his hand. He walked on, and Kaur indignantly asked the men if he was asking for trouble. Watching them, Ghislain thought that everything had gone smoothly so far. The dolphin who conquered the kingdom first focused on conquering this forest. At first, Ghislain didn't understand why Dolphin had decided to focus on this place, but from the notes he learned about the fossils and was able to prepare for today's expedition. But at the same time, this calmness made Ghislain begin to worry. He only had knowledge, not experience, so he told everyone to remain vigilant. He also said this because the forest in front of them was becoming denser, and gradually people began to move further. Because it became too dark, the mercenary thought it was already dark, and the others said that the forest was not as scary as they said. They kept saying that it was probably just rumors. But while they were chatting, Gordon stopped and looked ahead in surprise. After a short silence, he finally turned to the others. Gordon reminded them of the obvious. They had cut down a lot of trees to get here. Everyone did not understand why he was saying this, but they confirmed his words. Then Gordon turned to them and asked where the way back was. Hearing his question, their faces instantly darkened. At that moment, Ghislain's voice was heard, asking everyone to get ready. As soon as he said this, all the soldiers pulled out their weapons. But there were those who did not react to his words, and only asked why everyone was so tense. Ghislain turned to Gordon and said that if the man stayed there, he would die. Frowning, Ghislain told him to come back slowly. Gordon didn't argue, and continuing to hold the log, began to turn around. At that very moment, he accidentally hit a nearby tree with a log. Frightened by the sharp sound, he dropped the log and crouched down to the ground. The other soldiers were also scared and called Gordon an idiot. But Gordon was the most frightened of all, and turned sharply towards the trees. However, nothing happened and there were no more sounds. But the others were also on guard, and already realized that something strange was happening. Ghislain remained silent and watched, waiting to see what would happen next. Even in such a situation, there were some self-confident people. One mercenary said that the client was scared by every rustle. Pointing to the trees, the mercenary told everyone that there was nothing ahead but trees. Frowning, Ghislain told the mercenary to come back as well, otherwise they would both die. But he asked Ghislain why he was instilling fear, and thought that Ghislain did this on purpose to make it easier to control the mercenaries. However, at that moment something thick wrapped around his waist. Before he had time to come to his senses, the man was suddenly pulled back. Ghislain knew in advance that the presence of these monsters was not felt. No one could have predicted the appearance of the entity that was destined to become food if you did not immediately understand who was in front of you. Ghislain told everyone that the monster in front of them was Ent Dinas. It turned out that these monsters had already surrounded them. Frightened by these monsters, the robbers began to try to escape from them. Everyone was afraid of becoming food for them, so they tried to escape. Without taking their eyes off the people, the monsters threw their branches towards them. In an instant, several mercenaries were captured by them, and they went straight into the jaws of the monsters. The only one they didn't manage to eat was Gordon, who miraculously grabbed onto a rock. One of his comrades ran up to him and asked him to hold on, while he himself wanted to cut the branch. He hit the branch with his axe, and there was a loud cracking sound. However, it turned out that the branch was intact, but his axe was not. Before he could figure out what to do next, Gordon could no longer hold on to the stone, and they began to pull him down. He screamed in fear, and the others could only look at him. However, at that moment, Ghislain rushed to help. Raising his sword, which was enveloped in mana, he was able to cut the branch. And right after that, the guy turned in the air and was able to cut the monster's eye. Blood began to ooze from his eye, and he and Gordon landed on the ground. Everyone watched Ghislain's actions, so they guessed that the monster's eyes were their weak point. At that moment, Ghislain shouted loudly and told everyone to pull themselves together. He told everyone to gather together and raise their shields so that not a single vine would get through. Ghislain ordered them to focus on defense and wait for further instructions from him. Reacting quickly, everyone immediately prepared their shields. At that time, Ghislain found Kaur and asked where the oil lanterns were. After making sure that the lanterns were there, he ordered them to be thrown at the monsters to set them on fire. Meanwhile, the soldiers were panicking as the monsters stared at them. Having waited for the right moment, Ghislain gave the command to throw the lanterns. At his command, they began throwing lanterns at the monsters. However, It turned out that with the help of their vines, the monsters began to beat back the lanterns. The mercenaries were surprised by this and realized that at this rate, they would not be able to set the monsters on fire. When all the lanterns were knocked off, the monsters released their vines towards the people. However, at that moment, Jillian came to the aid of the mercenaries and easily cut through the vines. Valinda wasn't going to just stand by either. Taking aim, she swung and threw the daggers into the monster's eye. Ghislaine ordered Valinda and Jillian to help the Cerberuses prepare to throw lanterns, and Ghislaine himself was going to distract the monster's attention. Valinda was worried about him, so she asked the guy to be careful. When numerous vines were directed at him, Ghislaine was able to easily cut them down. But the monsters kept attacking, so Ghislaine had to constantly keep moving to avoid being caught. As he moved forward, he saw that the monster had legs. Seeing this, everyone was surprised and thought that Ghislaine would now be trampled. However, Ghislaine reacted and easily cut off the monster's leg. Then he jumped up and attacked the monster right in the eye. While he was attacking one monster, all the others targeted him. Turning to the soldiers, Valinda ordered them to throw down the lamps. Everyone reacted quickly and threw lamps, which the monsters didn't manage to take away this time. Instantly, they burst into flames. The mercenaries were delighted to see that they had hit their target. Turning around to look at them, Ghislaine told them not to stop and to continue attacking. Soon after, the entire forest was engulfed in flames. The mercenaries were stunned that they were still able to defeat the monsters. However, at the same time, they were worried that the fire could spread throughout the forest. Gordon was also delighted that the wooden monsters were helpless against fire. However, Ghislaine told them not to let their guard down, as this was not the end yet. And then he added that now the monsters will reveal their true form. As soon as he said this, steam appeared out of nowhere. Seeing the steam, everyone immediately assumed that the monsters had managed to extinguish the fire. Meanwhile, Valinda and Jillian approached Ghislaine. When Valinda asked what was going on, the boy explained that only the monsters' shells were immune to fire. And when the fire reached the watery core, steam appeared. Revealing their true form, the monsters opened their mouths and screamed. Seeing that the monsters were still alive, the soldiers became frightened. Drawing the soldiers' attention to himself, Ghislaine raised his sword, and he told everyone to take their weapons. Lowering his sword sharply and dispersing the steam, Ghislaine added that the fight would now begin, and then he himself rushed forward. When everyone saw how fearlessly he rushed forward, they froze in surprise. They thought it was easy to say that fighting these monsters was easy. However, Kaur ran forward with the Cerberuses, rejoicing that they would finally be able to enter the battle. Gordon even saw how his maid ran forward, worried about Ghislaine. At that moment, Jillian asked the mercenaries why they had frozen, and he sternly told everyone that this was Ghislaine's order, which meant they had to trust and act. When the mercenaries heard this, they were surprised. But afterward, they decided to join the fight as well, believing that Ghislaine would still come up with something. Since the monsters' shells were burned away, Ghislaine said they could survive without mana. He told his men that before them were simply huge scarecrows that could be killed with one blow. The next few hours were chaotic. Ghislaine understood that uncertainty would lead to their death, and his task was to dispel doubts among those who followed him. So he constantly stepped forward and slew the monsters, to instill faith in your people that can turn the impossible into possible. When the last monster was killed, everything instantly became quiet. Everyone was breathing heavily and whispering about how they had defeated these monsters. Without turning to the soldiers, Ghislaine told everyone to line up. There was a sound of trampling, and instantly all the soldiers lined up behind him. Ghislaine said that even at the very entrance to the forest there were plenty of monsters. When everyone heard this, they were afraid to imagine what would happen next. But Ghislaine continued speaking and asked no one to worry. Turning to them, he said that he would always be first. That's why he asked us to trust him and follow him. Looking at Ghislaine, all the mercenaries froze, as they were deeply impressed. Afterwards, they continued to move forward and cut down the forest. When they encountered monsters, they would fight them again. After the fights, Valinda treated Ghislaine's wounds and took care of him, slightly undermining the authority of the strong leader. At some point, they came across a monster that looked like a huge rat. Seeing her, everyone became alarmed and wondered when they would stop running into monsters. However, Kaur and Jillian did not lose their composure and stepped forward in front of them. With a dash, Kaur quickly closed the distance with the rat and cut off one of its legs. The rat began to lose its balance and fall, but still aimed at the people below. Then Jillian covered her teeth with the shield, and Ghislaine finished her off with a well-aimed blow. Ghislaine asked if everyone was safe and was told that they were. Then one of the mercenaries told the others to stay close to their employer if they did not want to die. Jillian noted that they were making good progress, and Kaur added that practice was the best teacher. After a short fight, Ghislaine told everyone to continue chopping down trees. However, among all of them, there was a mercenary who was the most frightened. Looking at the others, all he could think about was that there were only crazy people here. Soon the mercenaries reached the lake. Seeing the water, everyone rushed towards it and began to greedily gulp it down. But Valinda wasn't sure if it was safe. Ignoring her words, Ghislaine thought that so far everything was going according to plan. This lake was the main landmark on the way to their goal, so it was decided to set up camp here. Talking among themselves, the robbers noticed that the last 2 nights had been calm. When Manus suggested that the others leave quietly, the mercenaries were outraged, but he tried to explain to them that it was not worth risking their lives like that, because life cannot be bought for any amount of money. Gordon said that according to the employer, the target was close, so there was no point in leaving now, but Manus was outraged that everyone believed the guy. He assumed that Ghislaine simply wanted to curry favor by forcing them to clear this forest. Another mercenary said that they had already received an advance, and the point of mercenaries is to do what they are paid for. Manus agreed that Ghislaine had fought well, but he still believed they had simply been lucky, and he was sure that when it became too dangerous, Ghislaine would use them as cannon fodder. Everyone fell silent because they understood that such an option was possible. Manus intended to continue sowing discord, as trying to break through the monsters alone would be suicide. But suddenly one mercenary said that without their employer they would have died long ago, and then he pointed at Ghislaine. He personally treated the mercenaries' wounds and gave them advice on treatment. Valinda thought it would be better to save the expensive medicines for himself, but Ghislaine said that they took this ointment to use it. Having dealt with one person, Ghislaine called the next one. The mercenary asked if he would spend expensive medicine on them if he was going to use them as cannon fodder. The others also agreed that there was nothing to indicate that Ghislaine was going to abandon them. Manus was angry that that mercenary had ruined everything for him. Ghislaine told the others to stop chatting and rest. And then he turned to Jillian and Kaoru and said that they needed to talk. Kaoru asked if everything was okay, because if he were Ghislaine, he would have torn out Manus's tongue. However, he said to forget about it, because they had something more important. Ghislaine learned that, as he had expected, there were fewer lamps. Ever since they entered the forest, monsters had been attacking them day and night, but the last 2 nights had been calm. Hearing this, others became thoughtful. Jillian realized that they had entered the territory of the night monsters. Ghislaine confirmed his guess, and then he turned back to their quiet camp, and he calmly said that they were in serious danger. Everything was already calm and everyone was sleeping, when suddenly there was a rustling sound. Hearing him, Gordon opened his eyes, and he saw that a lamp was flying at him. Reacting, he quickly moved away and was not hurt. However, he immediately saw and felt that there was someone on his shoulder. Everyone woke up when they heard a loud scream. Then they saw Gordon waving an axe and trying to scare someone away. He tried to drive away the monsters he saw. Approaching Gordon, everyone asked what he was doing. He answered them with alarm that the monster was right in front of him. However, no one understood what he was talking about, and then they told him that there was no monster. Looking back, Gordon couldn't believe it. Everyone started to leave, thinking that Gordon was just having a nightmare. But then other mercenaries came and said that it was not a dream. One of them felt a strange presence and saw the lantern disappear. Then the other mercenaries gathered and began to talk about the strange things that had happened that night. One of them was sure that they were not alone here, and Ghislaine agreed with him. Seeing Ghislaine, everyone made way for the guy. Then Ghislaine told everyone to gather. While he was discussing the plan in the tent, all the mercenaries were gathered outside. Gordon was surprised to find that they were surrounded by monsters, even though they hadn't even been seen. Ghislaine explained that this was their specialty, and he suspected that they had begun to be pursued even from the lake. They were monsters that ruled the night. The Phalors could merge with the darkness, and even physical attacks had no effect on them. Hearing that they were moving in hundreds and absorbing light, the mercenaries were surprised. But Valinda now understood why the lanterns were disappearing. Kaur decided that it would be better to strike first, but Ghislaine said that they should wait for the monsters to attack. Valinda also asked if they could just wait. Ghislaine replied that if they attacked blindly, they would only provoke the monsters. But Jillian was surprised to hear that there was a way to defeat the monsters at once. Valinda had already managed to distribute the scrolls that Ghislaine had prepared to all the mercenaries. And now Ghislaine was about to explain the battle tactics. He explained that the Phalors were destroying the lanterns and narrowing their positions. And since they were inferior in numbers, it would not be possible to defend the entire territory. Jillian noticed that the camp was set up near the lake, so they were not surrounded on all sides. The situation was not hopeless, so Ghislaine believed that the initiative in the battle was on their side. Everyone was surprised to hear about the initiative. Ghislaine suggested dividing the squad into 3 groups. The defense squad will take up defensive positions. Crossbowmen will hold back the enemy, and the combat squad led by Ghislaine will begin the attack. Shield bearers and crossbowmen will not allow enemies to break through to the center. And at this time, the combat unit will concentrate its power and strike from the left flank. By joining forces with the central forces, they will surround the monsters and achieve victory. Kaur thought that if the center held, their plan would work. But suddenly Valinda interrupted everyone, and she reminded that, according to Ghislaine, attacking in the dark is useless, while fighting monsters is. For a moment, everyone looked at Ghislaine. And after that, Kaur simply suggested using mana. Ghislaine asked the girl not to worry about it, because they had magic scrolls. Soon, everything was organized, and the monsters began to attack. The last lantern finally went out, so the monsters began to approach. Stepping forward, Ghislaine recalled what was written in Dolphin's diary. It turned out that the Phalloras could not tolerate light, and when they shone the light on them, the monsters appeared. At Ghislaine's command, everyone tore up the scrolls. When they did this, small lights shot high into the sky. Seeing this, the monsters looked up with apprehension, and the next moment they were illuminated by a blinding light. Because of him, the monsters felt discomfort and roared. The darkness began to dissipate, and everyone noticed that the true form of the monsters was about to appear. When the light became less bright, the monsters rushed forward. The crossbowmen immediately reacted to their approach and prepared to attack. They started shooting, at the same time receiving orders to stand to the last. At that moment, Ghislaine was also preparing to perform. He informed everyone that they could now see the true form of the monsters, and then he waved his sword to the side, and he ordered the combat detachment to attack. Instantly, everyone joined the fight and a battle began. Leading the way, Ghislaine was the first to attack and kill the monsters. He knew that the Phalloras could merge with the darkness, but they were physically weak. Thinking about this, he ordered to destroy all the monsters at any cost. Jillian was able to deftly dodge their attacks, and during this time, Kaur dealt with every monster that came his way. However, there were too many of them for him alone. But Valinda was ready to cover for him. Her task was also to create a gap in the monster's line. Having attacked, Valinda turned to Ghislaine. Reacting quickly, the guy instantly found himself next to them and prepared to attack the monsters. With one swing of his sword, Ghislaine killed a dozen monsters at once. Ghislaine understood that the best warriors of Birdium were now with him, and the soldiers followed his orders without question. They killed many monsters, but there were still many failures. The mercenaries didn't understand where so many monsters came from. They could no longer cope with the defense, and the monsters caught up with them. However, it was at that moment that Ghislaine and the others arrived. After killing the monsters, Ghislaine praised his soldiers. Seeing the guy, everyone was happy about his arrival, because with him they would definitely not get lost. Immediately, Ghislaine gave the order to expand the formation and surround the monsters from all sides. Due to the enemy's pressure, the Phallora began to try to escape. When the mercenaries saw this, they were surprised. Ghislaine frowned at the fact that the Phalloras didn't wait for an ambush. They were smart. Then he ordered Valinda to find their leader, who should have horns on his head. She suggested simply letting the monsters go. But Ghislaine replied that they would then continue to pursue them until they were exhausted. And since they couldn't withstand another fight, Ghislaine wanted to end it all now. Hearing this, Valinda was silent at first, because Ghislaine had changed a lot. But she immediately came to her senses and accepted the order. She threw a hook, which wrapped around a tree branch. Afterwards, she was able to launch herself from the ground and rise into the air. This was enough to see all the monsters. She finally found the one she needed. She immediately took aim and wanted to tie him up with a rope. Thanks to her accuracy, the rope wrapped right around the leader's neck. And then she told Ghislaine that she had found the leader. Hearing her, Ghislaine prepared to kill the leader. With a dash, he broke through all the monsters and hit the leader with his sword. The blow was serious and caused the monster to bleed heavily. In the last moments, the monster screamed in pain. And then Ghislaine cut him in half. When the other Phalloras saw this, they also screamed, but did not attack Ghislaine. With the leader dead, Ghislaine ordered the other monsters to be dealt with. Everyone rushed forward, not wanting to yield to anyone in military merit. Their fight continued until sunrise. Only at that moment did Ghislaine cut down the last Phallor. Everyone fought well, so Ghislaine praised everyone. Hearing about the victory, everyone shouted joyfully. Everyone couldn't be more happy about this victory. Ghislaine's closest people asked him if he was okay. Ghislaine also praised them and asked Valinda to check the number of people. He also ordered the Cerberuses to scatter the corpses of the monsters around the camp to scare off other monsters. Jillian explained to Kaoru that if the Phalors were one of the most powerful creatures, then this was how they would protect themselves. However, Kara was angered that Jillian treated him like he was stupid. Ghislaine reflected that they had been in the forest for more than 10 days already, and now that they had defeated the Phalors, all that was left was to get to the runestones. With this thought, he gazed at the sunrise. But he couldn't believe that this was the end of their journey. Valinda then reported that 3 people were missing, but the Cerberus squad suffered no losses. Smiling, Kaur said that with such a commander this was not surprising. However, it is unclear where the 3 people went, as there were not even any corpses. Gordon noticed that Manus was missing, but they didn't find any bodies either. Another mercenary said that slipping away from a fight is in the spirit of Manus. In fact, it didn't even surprise him. The mercenaries told Manus that if they had not fled, they would have certainly died in that battle. And when the others wanted to slow down, Manus said that they needed to run further while the others distracted the monsters. But at that moment everyone froze and stared somewhere. They ignored Manus's words, and this angered the mercenary. But finally one of them was able to raise his hand and point into the distance. When Manus turned around, he saw a huge monster staring at them. Manus was completely horrified when he saw him. After all, it was the biggest monster he had ever seen. Without taking her eyes off the snake, she continued to look at the snack that had come to her. Meanwhile, Gizlin's squad continued to make its way. Kaur was suddenly surprised that everyone worked without any questions. After all, this was the first time he had seen all the mercenaries work so harmoniously. Jillian pestered Kauru again and said that they were doing a good job, unlike some people. Kaur said it would be a shame if the mercenaries were disbanded at the end of the mission, but Gizlin said he would hire them as his personal guard. It was believed that mercenaries could not defeat a regular army. However, these mercenaries have already surpassed the average level, thanks to recent experience. Then Kaur's people came and reported that they had scattered corpses around. Kaur noted that it seemed to really work, since they hadn't encountered a single monster yet. But Ghislaine was constantly on guard and hoped that his worries were not in vain. At that moment, Valinda approached him. She had to report if there was something ahead, and it turned out that she really did discover something. Hearing this, Ghislaine was surprised. He immediately ordered everyone to move forward as quickly as possible, and soon they reached their goal. Seeing this, the mercenaries were speechless with surprise, and Ghislaine calmly said that this was the goal of their mission. Before them at last was the vein of runestones. Kaur was surprised that something so precious was here, and Jillian reminded him that everything had been thought out. Valinda asked delightedly how Ghislaine knew about this. Many could not believe that they had seen runestones in such quantities. However, suddenly a man appeared ahead and told everyone that they would not pass. Ghislaine became wary when he saw him. The man, as if not alive, said that it was all over. After that, he fell, causing the mercenaries to worry. They recognized Manus and rushed towards him. However, they were immediately stopped by Ghislaine, and then the guy told everyone to retreat. Having said this, he swung his sword, and waving it vigorously, he began to disperse the smoke in the area. When the smoke cleared, everyone saw countless bones on the ground. Seeing such a spectacle, everyone was surprised and wondered what had happened here. Everyone became wary, and Ghislaine said that they would have to sweat to get the stones. After all, judging by the scale, there was a very powerful monster here. However, Ghislaine did not remember any mention of this in Dolphin's diary. Turning around, he wanted to give an order. But Ghislaine didn't have time to finish speaking, because he saw a huge python staring at him. Without giving any chance to react, the snake opened its mouth and hissed. Ghislaine ordered everyone to disperse, and the others turned around at the noise. At that moment, Ghislaine had already rushed forward, and the python was trying to swallow the guy. However, he escaped the jaws and attacked the snake on the head. Jumping onto the snake's body, he pushed off with his legs and attacked straight at the head. However, it turned out that this powerful attack left very little trace behind. The others were surprised that even magic couldn't break through the scales. Meanwhile, the python tried to swallow the guy again, but Ghislaine attacked her with fangs, causing poison to spray everywhere. Seeing the poison, Ghislaine managed to dodge its splashes. However, when he turned back to the python, he saw that it was about to attack. At that moment, Ghislaine became wary. He managed to react and block the blow. However, the python still pinned him to the ground with its tail. Seeing this, Valinda began to worry about the guy. The snake continued to spin, and everything collapsed under its weight. The mercenaries became wary and tried to dodge her blows. Valinda and Jillian also helped people escape. The only sounds that reached Ghislaine were the screams of the mercenaries trying to escape. Now he understood who the owner of these stones was. But he didn't expect that this owner would be a bloody python. Usually the pythons were deep in the forest, so Ghislaine didn't expect to meet him. But now he knew they wouldn't hold out. But at the same time, he did not have time to return and prepare a new expedition. After all, if they retreat now, the entire journey will lose its meaning. Ghislaine told the python not to interfere with him, as he had a great responsibility. Having awakened his mana cores, Ghislaine prepared for battle. The python attacked him sharply, but the boy dodged. Dodging the jaws, Ghislaine left a cut on the python's mouth, and then he was able to cut one of the snake's eyes. However, as soon as he did this, the python tried to attack with its tail. Reacting, Ghislaine put his sword under the blow, but the weight of the snake was too heavy for him. At that moment, the snake hissed. Python continued to attack, but Ghislaine was able to block the attacks every time. He didn't care how slim his chances of winning were. After all, his sense of duty did not allow him to stop this important battle. At that moment, all eyes were on Ghislaine. Everyone watched intently as he single-handedly fought off the python. The fight quickly drained the guy's strength. However, he and the python stood motionless and looked at each other. Ghislaine knew that his mana would run out before he could kill the snake. Then he heard voices behind him. Everyone came forward to Ghislaine and asked if he was wounded. Valinda asked Ghislaine to retreat, promising that they would detain the python. But Ghislaine told them to move away, which surprised everyone. They asked him, confused, why he said that. Jillian also asked what it meant. Ghislaine explained that he could not provide them with protection against such a monster now, and he also couldn't afford to lose them all. When asked what would happen to him, Ghislaine said that he could handle the python himself. Valinda understood that the fact that they were still alive was already a miracle. But she didn't understand why Ghislaine was going so far. At that moment, the python opened its mouth again and poison sprayed out of its mouth. When this happened, Ghislaine shouted for everyone to run. But to his surprise, everyone rushed forward and blocked the poison. Ghislaine didn't expect the mercenaries to stand up for him. Then they told him that they would fight together. The mercenaries said they had never met such a noble employer as Ghislaine. Kaur also suggested simply killing the snake in order to take all the treasures for himself. Jillian volunteered to distract the snake and create a hole in the defense. They all asked to trust them, just as they had previously trusted Ghislaine. Hearing this, Ghislaine remained silent. Then, to the surprise of the others, he began to list the benefits of the snake. She was large, poisonous, had tough scales, and if they missed the attack, they would die immediately. Valinda was touched to hear this. Ghislaine continued that the snake now had a wound, and one eye was damaged. And after this expedition, they were obliged to return together. When the mercenaries heard this, a fighting spirit appeared in them, and the snake, opening its mouth wide, rushed at them. The soldiers held the defense, and the strong warriors rushed straight at the snake. Kauru managed to inflict a wound on the snake. Experiencing pain, the snake began to scream and writhe shrilly. At that moment, Jillian attacked her and knocked her to the ground with his strength. Before the snake had time to get its bearings, Ghislaine had aimed at its second eye. Python didn't have time to react, so Ghislaine's attack was successful. Ghislaine knew that even with the perfect strategy, things could still go wrong. But if he gives in, all the people will die, and he couldn't afford to let that happen. When the snake was blinded, he darted upward, ready to finish what he had started. He had a huge responsibility because he knew the future. But at that moment, the python swallowed the guy. Seeing this, everyone was afraid for Ghislaine. However, a sword immediately pierced the snake's skin. As he began to move, he cut the snake's body. And so Ghislaine, covered in poison, managed to escape from the snake's mouth. When the others saw this, they were delighted with their leader. Ghislaine was the future of Birdium. Meanwhile, in the castle, they were discussing Ghislaine's grave crime. They were angry that the guy imagined himself a lord and did whatever he wanted. Another count asked what was the point of being indignant when the guy had been in the forest for 2 weeks already. And if Scoven hadn't lied, they would have stopped Ghislaine long ago. Lord Birdium listened silently to the indignation of his advisors. He was silent, but his face looked very gloomy as he thought about his son. Suddenly someone came inside and addressed the man. The knight said that everyone should see it with their own eyes. Everyone was surprised to hear from him that Ghislaine had returned. Meanwhile, the guy was heading towards their castle. Soon he found himself in the same room with other counts. Everyone, including Ghislaine's father, looked at the boy gloomily, waiting for his reaction. First, Ghislaine greeted his father. In response, he only reminded that he had forbidden monsters from entering the forest. Ghislaine apologized, but said he had to do it. But others were outraged, because they did not consider this a worthy reason to disobey the order. The knight was indignant, because it was not only about Ghislaine's life, but also about the fact that monsters could emerge from the forest and start attacking people. But Ghislaine replied that he was alive, and the monsters had not invaded. Hearing this, everyone was outraged by his insolence. Suddenly, one of them asked if Ghislaine found this amusing. And then he added that everything worked out, so we can turn a blind eye to it. However, he still believed that there was no justification for this. Taking the paper, Ghislaine learned that it was from the county of Rayfold. It turns out that the count was worried after Ghislaine's visit to Amelia, so he found out what happened there. And then he said that Ghislaine angered Count Rayfold, so he broke off the engagement and would stop helping them. Ghislaine thought to himself that the letter did not look like a fake. He thought that Amelia was willing to ally herself even with the enemy to destroy Ghislaine. But now it meant that he could no longer put any pressure on Amelia. If Ghislaine had been late, he would have been trapped inside the mansion, and time was clearly not on his side. The man asked if Ghislaine had anything to say. Others asked for the money to be returned to the Rayfolds, complaining that such a sum would have lasted them for a long time. Then Ghislaine replied that he had spent it all. He explained that the money went towards an expedition to the monster forest. As soon as he said this, there was silence. One of those present nervously asked if Ghislaine had spent absolutely all the money on this. Ghislaine said he was sorry and had no excuse. Then he was suddenly grabbed by the collar of his clothes. Ghislaine was asked what kind of heir he was if he had destroyed the county with his own hands. Another also intervened and said that now Ghislaine was not an heir, but a criminal. But Ghislaine interrupted them and said that he would now personally allocate money for the needs of the mansion. His father asked him what it meant. Then Ghislaine called Valinda inside. While the girl was placing something on the table, Ghislaine said that he had not come to the forest for a walk. When the box opened, everyone's looks changed, and Ghislaine presented everyone with high-quality runestones. When they saw them, everyone couldn't believe it. The surprised men assumed that Ghislaine had bought the stones with money from Amelia, but Ghislaine answered them that he had found a vein of stones in the forest. One man replied that the money for this stone would not be enough to maintain the mansion anyway. Ghislaine chuckled and agreed that it was so. However, this was far from the only stone in his hands. Outside, work was constantly going on, and mercenaries were transporting stones. Everyone was surprised that the guy had mined so much stone in 2 weeks. And Valinda confirmed that everything was obtained during the expedition. But besides the stones, they also obtained the remains of that snake. Ghislaine said all actions were for the good of the county. Ghislaine's father was told that this would be enough to provide for them. Everyone was shocked that they would no longer have to fight for survival. At that moment, someone put their hands on Ghislaine's shoulders. And then they started praising him and asking if he had gotten tired during this time. Suddenly he told them that he had several conditions. He asked for the release of Scoven and Ricardo, because they were simply following orders, and access to the monster forest should be open to everyone. Any unnecessary rumors would harm the county, and everyone agreed with this. And in the end, the guy said that he would personally lead the service and recruit mercenaries. But they found it unacceptable that Ghislaine wanted to form his own army. They tried to explain to him that now Ghislaine should be begging for forgiveness, but instead he was demanding complete freedom. But Ghislaine replied that he was creating conditions in which they would no longer have to depend on Rayfold. And if the small issues raised delay the work, it will negatively impact their county's finances. Then they turned to Ghislaine's father and asked him to object to something. At that moment, someone interrupted their conversation. The mercenaries approached and greeted Ghislaine. Jillian asked for further instructions, as the loading was almost complete. And Kaur asked what they should do with the remains of the python. Ghislaine told them to separate the poison, blood, flesh, and skin from each other to prevent rotting. Randolph said that the number of Ghislaine's mercenaries was impressive, but they didn't understand how young Ghislaine was able to unite such strong people. Looking at his son, the Lord was silent. At that moment, Ghislaine also turned to look at them. He told his son that it must have been difficult to subdue the mercenaries. Then he listened to Ghislaine's answer that without mercenaries nothing would have worked. Then he turned around and told everyone to go back. He told Ghislaine that he would turn a blind eye to it this time. But he warned Ghislaine of the consequences if he disobeyed orders again. Ghislaine thanked his father for this. Finally, he said that one day the mansion would belong to Ghislaine, and that it really did contain the spirit of the Northern Wolf. The Northern Wolf was a title given to someone who defended the northern border of the Kingdom of Ludania. There was no one near Ghislaine's father. The military might was insignificant, but he still continued to fight, remaining without his wife and son. And as a reward for his efforts, he received only a miserable death. The work was finished and everyone was planning to rest. Ghislaine told everyone to get ready, as they could move out at any moment. But Ghislaine was asked not to rush, because he needed rest. Valinda said they had worked hard to remove the poison from his body. But then the guy turned to her, and he said that he was counting on her. Afterwards, he moved away from them and walked forward. The news that they have extracted the stones will spread quickly. That's why Ghislaine wanted to strengthen their power, become so strong that no one would even think of attacking them. However, with this thought, he fell down without strength. Soon the news spread throughout the area. Partial development of the monster forest has been confirmed. It was necessary to start a war with the Durgads and destroy Birdium. There was a lot of noise at the meeting about this. It was unknown how many of their own people remained in those lands. Then someone reported that there were 2 vassals and 1 knight. If the Degrad prince dies in Birdium territory, it will trigger a territorial war. Sam is put in charge of this operation. Hearing this, everyone was surprised, because they did not expect that the trump card would have to be revealed so soon. Someone objected that such a decision seemed very hasty. Then they told him that everything had changed because of the forest of monsters. Delphin was the one making the decisions, so there was no point in questioning his orders. Then Desmond told everyone to prepare for war, and then he asked if anyone else was aware of the current situation. Amelia was hysterical when she found out what had happened. She buried her face in her assistant and sobbed. The girl succumbed to emotions from the fact that Ghislaine had done everything with her own money. She also had to humiliate herself in front of her father, so that he would stop supporting Birdium. But the man replied that she didn't look like herself. Hearing this, the girl sighed, and she agreed that she had given in to her emotions too much. But I accepted that what had been done could not be changed. And the knight asked Amelia to give the order. She said that with the Mind Stones, Birdium would soon emerge from its financial crisis. But the main thing was that they had not yet managed to sell the stones. They also recently discovered the stones, so they could have time to sell them. Amelia said there was only one place in the north where they could sell the stones, and it was a great crimson tower. The stones were needed for research, and the magic towers took supplies seriously. Now the target was no longer Ghislaine, but the workers who were transporting the stones. The man replied that there were 2 towers in the north, so there was no point in concentrating power on one. Amelia replied that Ghislaine would not get involved with that tower, since they had already lost their grandeur. Now she was going to take everything away from Ghislaine. Meanwhile, the guy lay unconscious. In his sleep, he recalled what had happened. He recalled what happened when he found himself inside the python. Before the predator swallowed its prey, it began to secrete poison from its inner shell to soften the victim. The mana burned away the poison on contact, but the toxic smoke did not go away. As a result, many lost consciousness or died at that moment. Ghislain tried to stay conscious, because he knew that otherwise everything would end. What was dear to him depended on this expedition, and if he couldn't avoid poisoning, he was going to take control of it. The poison that entered the body was concentrated in mana, and he wanted to neutralize it by rotating the mana in the core. Ghislain was able to convert the poison into an alternative fuel that could withstand a mana blast. At that moment, the guy woke up. He immediately realized that he was alive. As he stood up, he wondered what had happened, as his consciousness was still hazy. Then his gaze fell on his sister. As soon as Ghislain woke up, she rushed to hug her brother. She said that Ghislain left, and when he returned, he lost consciousness. But now Elena was glad that he was okay. For a moment, Ghislain was silent with surprise. When he wanted to say something, the girl sharply pushed him away, and she ran out of the room screaming that Ghislain had woken up. Ghislain frowned, realizing that he had been lying there like that for 2 days. He tried to hold out as long as possible, but his young body couldn't handle the strain. But still, the body remained in good shape, and such regeneration was impossible in 2 days. Regeneration has improved and mana volume has increased. It seemed to Ghislain that the very nature of mana had changed. He immediately thought that the mana had mixed with the python's energy. He didn't know before that one could become stronger this way. And it turns out that the risk to life was justified. And if Ghislain thought correctly, he would become tens of times stronger. But he decided to get back to business. Within 2 days, everyone should have already known about the stones. Therefore, Ghislain decided to urgently gather mercenaries. When someone knocked on the door, Ghislain told Valinda to come in. But it wasn't only Valinda who came in, but also his father. Father was glad that Ghislain woke up. Ghislain was surprised when he saw him. The man continued to say that Valinda had told him about his battle with the python, and he was glad that Ghislain remained safe. Valinda asked again if everything was okay, since he had suddenly lost consciousness. But Lord Bertium interrupted them, and he told Ghislain that we needed to talk. It turns out he had some kind of request for Ghislain. Ghislain was a little stunned when he heard the request. Soon they found themselves where Ghislain was training. Ghislain was in a situation for the first time when he and his father found themselves at a training ground. In the past, he tried to avoid his father so that he wouldn't start scolding him. The father apologized for calling Ghislain early, but the boy replied that everything was fine, and then he asked what the request was for him. Silently, the father looked at him, and then he also silently looked away. Remembering his mother's words, Ghislain wondered if this was what she had meant. A long time ago, she told him that his father was not the most open person. Ghislain was surprised that she would talk like that about his father. The mother continued that the father believed that he should be a support for everyone, so he constantly hid his feelings. The only exception was the moment when he confessed to her. That's why she asked Ghislain to understand her father, even if he seemed cold. After all, he was simply a man who did not know how to express his feelings. Ghislain tensed when his father asked him to raise his sword, but he did not object and prepared to fight. Without a signal, they entered into combat. Lord Bertium attacked first, but Ghislain blocked the blow. Then they both started to constantly maneuver and attack back. Ghislain also confidently blocked his father's attacks. Having created a distance, they froze for a moment. Ghislain noticed that his father's sword was very heavy. This blade was powerful enough to crush many enemies, but at the same time thin enough to be able to defend itself. It became especially good a weapon in the hands of an experienced person. The Lord struck with all his might, but Ghislain parried it and was about to counterattack. Reacting to this, the man managed to block the attack. The rivals looked at each other with a careful gaze, and in the end, both were close to victory. They were able to point blades at each other, but it was a draw. Then the father said that Ghislain had grown a lot. Ghislain thanked him for this, but he tensed up when his father wanted to make a remark. Father said that Ghislain should hold back his pressure when he crossed swords with someone. Otherwise his intentions would be too obvious to the opponent. Ghislain thought about this, as he always tried to anticipate the enemy's movements, but he suddenly realized that this was the first time someone had officially given him a lesson. His swordsmanship was forged in battle. It was instinctive. He never had any proper training, so he might have missed some things. Ghislain always relied only on himself. But it was nice when someone taught you. Thinking about this, he thanked his father again. The man looked sternly at his son, and he said that it was a reproach. Regardless of Ghislain's achievements, he wanted his son to follow the rules. Ghislain understood that otherwise everything would lead to chaos. In the end, my father said that Ghislain had changed a lot. Now Ghislain's gaze became wider, so his father told him to continue in the same spirit. Ghislain couldn't help but think about the duty that lay upon him. It was obvious that he had to take care of the people of their lands, but then he remembered that his father had a request. There was silence, because his father did not dare tell him. But in the end, he still awkwardly asked if Ghislain had any extra money. The mercenary camp was near the monster forest. When Ghislain returned, he asked how everyone was doing. Everyone answered in unison that everything was going wonderfully. Everyone asked about his condition, but he was already feeling better. Suddenly, he asked Jillian about Rachel's condition. The man did not answer immediately. He didn't expect his daughter to ever recover, so he was very grateful. Ghislain was genuinely happy for him. And then he decided to tell them something. He said that their estate was in great danger. When everyone heard this, they were surprised. In the end, Ghislain told about how Elena was attacked, about how they wanted to start a war in this way, and how he found the dying Prince de Grad, and about the forces that have set their sights on Bertium. He thought that they had been followed for a long time, and that the spy was in the estate. Now Valinda understood what the rush was about, and Kaur said that you won't get bored with Ghislain. Jillian said that the estate was a perfect target now, since it was weak, but it received a lot of stones. Ghislain agreed with this. Valinda suggested telling everyone about it as soon as possible. Ghislain refused, because if Elena was betrayed by her knights, then there had long been a spy among the vassals, and after discovering the stone, they will definitely be attacked soon. The guy said that a tough battle awaited them. Then there was silence among everyone. Kaur told Ghislain to just give the order. He said with a grin that you won't get bored with them. Jillian said that they had already trusted him with their lives, so they were ready to follow him to the end. Valinda agreed and also wanted to protect Ghislain. The guy chuckled at their enthusiasm. Their greatest enemy was Duke Delphin, and also Desmond and Amelia under his command. Ghislain told everyone that they were heading to the Scarlet Flame Tower. Valinda asked why not the Crimson Tower, since they offered better prices there. Ghislain replied that they would have fewer problems with the Scarlet Flame Tower. Jillian agreed, because they would probably be attacked. Ghislain knew that the Tower of Scarlet Flame was now trying to restore its greatness. But there was another important reason why he chose this tower. There was one magician in the Tower of Scarlet Flame. The girl waited for the light that her teacher had said would shine upon them. Soon everyone arrived at the place. The mercenaries were surprised by the high tower. They were also surprised by the city, which was on a different level compared to Bertium. Magicians were constantly visible on the streets. All the mercenaries stared at them, because they had never seen such magic before. The mage's expression darkened when they saw the mercenaries. And then everyone started casting spells at the same time. Then everyone saw that the magicians simply disappeared. The mercenaries were surprised and screamed out loud because of this. Ghislain noticed that they didn't seem to be welcome. Although things were going badly at the tower, Valinda noted that it looked good. Ghislain agreed that everything looked normal. But soon this place will fall into decay. Everyone remarked on the size of the tower, but they finally reached it. Suddenly Valinda noticed that there were no gatekeepers, and the armor just lay on the ground. Suddenly someone's voice was heard from above. At that moment the armor began to move and block the way. The magicians forbade travelers to enter the tower, and then they asked me to state my name and purpose of arrival. The armor was controlled, but this was obvious, because the mages never exposed themselves. Jillian told the mages that the heir of Bertium was in front of them, and then he asked to call the person who was responsible for trade, but the magicians replied that they weren't buying anything. Valinda was outraged that they didn't even look at the goods. The magician replied that Bertium was a poor land, and nothing valuable could be brought from there, and then they decided to drive away the travelers. The girl got angry and told the magicians to quickly come down. Ghislain was asked what to do, but he remained silent. He asked the magician if they were sure they wouldn't buy it. Having shown the stone, he said that the magicians should certainly know what this thing was. The magician was surprised when he saw the stone, and when he saw its light, he was convinced that it was a rune stone. Then he guessed what exactly they had brought for sale. With a grin, Ghislain asked if they would buy it. They soon apologized to them for their behavior. The sales manager introduced himself to Ghislain. Ghislain said they had a huge shipment, so he needed someone to take charge of the deal. Hearing that he was asking for someone no lower than the Tower Lord, the manager was surprised. He agreed to convey this to the bishop and asked the guests to be taken to another room. Valinda asked with a grin whether it was worth it for them to insult other people's lands. But suddenly they heard some noise. In response to Ghislain's question, the man replied that everything was fine. He was told that such sounds were normal during magical research. When the guy opened the door, there was a lot of smoke in the room. He got angry because he forbade the girl to come here. He chuckled that she didn't even know how to do magic, but she demanded a position as a researcher. The magicians did not understand how they could accept such a girl at all. Breathing heavily, she wanted to object, and she said that she also had the right to visit the laboratory. But he only grinned at the words that she was also a magician. Suddenly, he decided to assume that she was right, but then she should be able to use protective spells, and now he wanted her to block the attack. Seeing this, the girl became scared. At that moment, the flame was already approaching her. The girl stretched out her hand and wanted to cast a spell of protection, but she didn't succeed and she got scared. At that moment, someone appeared in front of her. With the help of his sword, Ghislain was able to dispel the attack. When the magicians saw him, they were surprised. Ghislain asked if this is how research is done, He was angered by the tower's methods. The Lord was surprised to hear that they were running out of rune stones. He said that this would only widen the gap between them and the Crimson Tower. And he reminded me that he had told me to buy stones in reserve. The magicians thought to themselves that every time they wanted to spend money, they were refused. And in the end, the money went towards entertainment and luxury. Another magician said that the ruler of that tower was on the 7th circle, and their ruler was on the 6th. But the bishop forbade him to touch on this topic. The ruler was angry that his rival seemed to have bought up all the stones in the area. Then the manager burst in on them. The bishop was indignant that he had interrupted them so abruptly, but he reported that a huge shipment of stones had been delivered to them. Everyone was surprised to hear about this. Meanwhile, the magician grappled with Ghislain, but Ghislain didn't care. He easily repelled all the magician's attacks. Then a large stream of flame was directed at him, but Ghislain easily cut him down too. Those watching were amazed at his abilities, and the magician was angry and did not understand what kind of tricks these were. Suddenly, something started wrapping around him. Unnoticed, Valinda crept up behind him, and she asked how he dared to attack their master. At that moment, the bishop came and asked what kind of mess they had made here. He saw his student being tied up by a guest, and another drawing a sword. The girl was a little alarmed when she saw him, and Ghislain told Valinda to let the boy go. That magician was glad to see the Lord. He rushed towards the man and said that he had been attacked. Trembling, he said that weak Vanessa should not come to the lab, because she could get hurt there. Valinda joked and called him a girl. Vanessa said she needed a lab. Ghislain watched silently for now. In the long run, Vanessa was a real nightmare. He was surprised that a monster like her had had hard times. The Lord was angry that they not only penetrated his tower, but also harmed his students. Valinda asked what they should do, since they had been threatened. Ghislain apologized to the Lord for the late greeting, and he introduced himself as the heir of Bertium. He also said that he wanted to sell the stones. Hearing this, the bishop was surprised out of the blue. The student was also surprised that Ghislain came to sell stones. Ghislain said that his men were guarding the goods outside. He invited the magicians to look at it, and they went outside. They were surprised by the number of stones. The magicians didn't understand where the guy got so many stones from. They asked what they should do with such goods. But the Lord became gloomy and did not answer. Finally, he became delighted and said that it was simply a gift from heaven. After all, with this it was possible to bypass the Crimson Tower once and for all. That's what he thought, but he said there wasn't much product and the quality was poor. Cower was angry that their prey was looked down upon. Vanessa said that even one cart would last them for several weeks. But the Lord told her to be silent and get out of sight, and he said with contempt that she could only make life difficult for everyone. Ghislain just watched it, and the ruler asked the magicians if they agreed with him. The magicians agreed that upon closer inspection the stones did not look very good. Valinda was outraged by this, and said that they had gone through a lot for these stones, but the magicians asked what difference it made to them if the stones were difficult to obtain. Ghislain assumed they wouldn't buy, and then he told his people to leave, believing that they would find other buyers. Then the Lord exchanged glances with his magicians, and they said that they were still ready to buy such a batch. The Lord said that today he was generous, so he would buy all their goods. But Ghislain interrupted him and said that he did not need his mercy. He ordered Kaoru to unload one cart for them and then drive on. And he added that they only wanted to sell one cart anyway. The magicians were put in an awkward position by this. Kaoru chuckled and said that he had completely forgotten about it. And then he told his people to move. When the Lord became indignant, Ghislain replied that they had misunderstood each other due to the mistake of his subordinates. And he explained that they had dropped in here to earn some money for their travel expenses. But they were heading to the Crimson Tower. Hearing this, the Lord became angry, and he said they just wanted to check out the new supplier. Then Ghislain chuckled, and soon they found themselves at the negotiating table. The Lord introduced him to the elders of their tower, and they all reached the 5th circle. Ghislain replied that it was impressive, but he expected nothing less from the 2nd tower in the north. The Lord said that Ghislain had probably heard rumors about them, but they were false. Valinda didn't understand why she should provoke him again, but Jillian suggested that she trust him. The bishop decided to get to the point and discuss the price. Then Ghislain showed 2 fingers. He wanted twice the market value. All the magicians were outraged that he did not know how things were done. The Lord also told the boy that this was the wrong approach to trading. But Ghislain replied that the tower itself deserved double the price. The magicians were again outraged by how impudent the guy was. The Lord calmly addressed the boy, and he sternly told him that he should be more careful, because he was just a thoughtless boy. Ghislain listened calmly and remained silent. The bishop continued that the boy was young, so they were willing to forgive his mistakes. When he offered to pay slightly above market value, Ghislain stood up, and he said that he didn't see any interest in the product, so they would just leave. Afterwards, he actually turned around, making the ruler nervous. He tried to stop the guy, and reminded him that he was not refusing to buy the product. Hearing that the Lord was simply nervous, Ghislain chuckled. The rest watched calmly from the side. In the end, the bishop agreed to buy it for double the price. and then Ghislain was satisfied. But he sternly said that only one cart. The bishop said that they were ready to buy everything, because it was not in vain that they brought it all. Ghislain said that the Crimson Tower would agree to triple the price, so it would be more profitable to go there. The Lord said that Ghislain had already tested his patience. Then Ghislain began to leave, and the Lord stopped him. The man shouted that he would buy it at triple the price. This made Ghislain grin. He was glad that they were able to understand each other. The Lord told the boy to sit still while he brought the money. Inside, the man knew he had a high position, but he was dancing to the boy's tune. Suddenly, Ghislain said that he had not told about all of his conditions. Then the Lord began to lose his temper, and Ghislain asked that Vanessa be handed over to him. When he said this, the bishop was surprised by such a demand, and Ghislain said once again that he wanted her to become his personal mage. One night the men were sitting around the fire and roasting meat. One of them said that it would be worthwhile to do it himself, and not force the one-armed man to do it. The other was outraged by this, and his anger forced the first to remain silent. Suddenly the man decided to ask Ghislain about Vanessa. He asked if Ghislain knew anything about her. There was an incident when the northern part of Lutania was burned down by one magician. Ghislain thought that the scarlet disaster of the seventh circle of magic sounded impressive. The man said that at some point the girl went completely crazy and began studying mana cultivation. Although she was a mage, she has been wreaking havoc and destroying the homes of lords, and recently there was even a request for her. Hearing this, Ghislain became silent. He suddenly thought that she had reached the seventh circle through cultivation, not the traditional way, and he thought it sounded tempting. And then he suggested that Cloud recruit the girl, but this never happened, because the girl did not learn to control her magic, and when they found her, she was barely alive. But even so, she was able to reach the seventh circle. This time, Ghislain was determined to recruit her. All her comrades thought that the girl did not look strong, but the magicians wanted to agree, because Vanessa was useless to them anyway. The Lord agreed, and Ghislain added that they needed mages of the third circle and above. This surprised the man. And Ghislain continued that they would soon have a territorial war. This made everyone tense. Ghislain demanded, in addition to Vanessa, several more third circle mages. Everyone stared at the guy in surprise, and the Lord gradually boiled with rage. At that moment he could not stand such mockery of himself. The force that emanated from it knocked out the glass from the windows. And then he turned to the guy, and he asked if Ghislain took him for a fool. After all, the magicians assigned to the tower did not have the right to participate in territorial wars. Now he felt that Ghislain had insulted their tower. Because of this pressure, all of Ghislain's comrades were ready to fight. However, Ghislain remained calm. He looked intently at the Lord, and then he told the man that he would regret it. He added that there are tens of times more stones on their territory than they brought. Hearing this, the magicians were surprised. Ghislain said that this information had already spread throughout the north. The man replied that those who wanted easy money would soon come to them. Ghislain said that they needed the help of the tower to strengthen their position. The man was surprised when Ghislain spoke about custom deliveries for their tower, and he said that it was a matter of time before the Scarlet Tower would take its place at the top. The Lord stared at the hand extended to him, and then he grimaced with displeasure. But after weighing everything, I agreed with Ghislain. Soon he informed Alfoy that everything had been decided. He told the boy that he was sending him at the head of the squad for the common good. Hearing such praise, the guy was impressed. The Lord told Alfoy that he would definitely need such experience, and he also had to make sure that Ghislain did not trade these stones with anyone else. He asked the guy to be patient for just a year. For a while, Alfoy was quiet, but later he agreed with the bishop. But soon after, he seemed to begin to regret it. The moment he was welcomed to Bertium, the other mages assessed the castle, but Alfoy remained silent. He thought that this place was just a dump, but he agreed out of respect for the Lord. Alfoy introduced himself to Ghislain, and the boy replied that there would be a lot of work for the mages. While Ghislain looked around, Alfoy was silently indignant that the villager considered him his servant. Suddenly, Ghislain turned to Alfoy, and he asked where Vanessa was. The guy said it was probably somewhere in the back with the luggage. Only at that moment did a girl appear, carrying several suitcases. She looked very tired from the journey. Almost falling in front of Ghislain, she greeted the boy. But when Alfoy complained that she was slow, Ghislain frowned. Then Ghislain told her to drop everything and come to him. Alfoy told Ghislain to leave it, since she was used to this kind of work. Before he could finish speaking, a suitcase flew into his face. Under its weight, he fell to the ground. Alfoy indignantly asked what Ghislain was doing. Then the guy replied that Vanessa belonged no longer to the bathhouse, but to Ghislain's people. Now he was ready to turn a blind eye to this, but he forbade bothering Vanessa more. Seeing this, the girl became a little embarrassed. Alfoy was angry that they were treated this way. He asked how Ghislain could treat a third-class mage and the heir to the tower like that. He believed that the aristocrat had crossed the line and was ready to start fighting. Ghislain clicked his tongue in displeasure and snapped his fingers. Then all the mercenaries drew their weapons. The magicians were outraged that the savages pointed weapons at them. But Ghislain told the boy to shut up. They had a contract, so Ghislaine could do with it as he wanted. Alfoy was indignant, but he had nothing to say in response. Ghislaine said that if Alfoy wants respect, he needs to earn it. But Alfoy was outraged by the words that he was only a spare unit. As he left, Ghislaine asked his people to show him how everything worked. Kaur chuckled and said that life must have been easier in the tower. Seeing 2 mercenaries in front of him, Alfoy became scared. Vanessa watched from the side with almost indifference. Then Ghislaine approached her. He told her not to listen to anyone's orders, because she was now his mage. Vanessa was embarrassed by his words. And then she looked away, and she reminded that she didn't know how to do magic. Smiling slightly, Ghislaine told her to follow him. He promised to help the girl realize her potential. Soon they arrived at the training area. The girl looked around indifferently, and Ghislaine turned to her. He asked how deep her knowledge was, and it turned out that she had studied the 5th circle. Ghislaine was impressed. Vanessa looked at him silently for a moment, and she said that she couldn't use spells anyway. Ghislaine asked if there was a reason for this, and Vanessa said that she had not felt mana since childhood. But I still studied every day without stopping. After some time, her teacher died. She believed that this was why she was expelled. Ghislaine remained silent. The 5th circle was comparable in strength to the skills of the tower elders. In magic, it was necessary not only to memorize formulas, but also to understand the principle. Vanessa understood this, but her body couldn't keep up with her mind. But Vanessa's efforts were not in vain. She simply had to take a different route. He remembered Cloud's words about Vanessa. The man thought she was just crazy, but now Ghislaine wanted to teach the girl mana cultivation. She was surprised when she heard this. She didn't understand why she needed to cultivate, but Ghislaine said it was all connected, and he said that she hadn't even tried that approach. Suddenly she became scared, and she said that to do magic like that was madness. But Ghislaine asked her to at least try. At that moment their eyes met, and then Vanessa thought about his proposal, and she wondered if she could do magic. Then she clenched her fist tightly. So far she hasn't succeeded in anything. Ghislaine thought that he had the same eyes in his past life, full of regret, rage, and hatred. She strove for magic, but only carried herself further into the abyss. But now Ghislaine knew how to help her, and he will not let her fall into that abyss again. He wanted to lend her a helping hand. Ghislaine was able to transfer his mana into Vanessa's body. Meanwhile, the girl felt a heat in her body. Ghislaine told her not to open her mouth, otherwise she would disrupt the mana root. He said that his mana was in her, and she should not lose that feeling. He guided her and told her to focus on this feeling. Then a stream of mana spread throughout Vanessa's entire body, capturing every corner of the body and returning mana to the core. The whole room was illuminated by bright light. Suddenly Vanessa remembered something. She remembered how her teacher defended Vanessa and said that the girl had talent, but the Lord replied that she was missing something. He asked what kind of magician she was if she couldn't do magic. The bishop believed that no matter how much they spent on Vanessa, it was pointless. Vanessa recognized her little self, and suddenly I saw another memory with the teacher. She said that if she had been more talented, the teacher would not have had to leave the tower. But the teacher said he was just going on a trip. That's why he asked her not to be upset. He said that no darkness in the world lasted forever. The teacher promised that one day light would be shed on her, and that light turned out to be Ghislaine. Then she realized that the teacher was right. Now, finally, someone else extended a hand to her, and even she finally got some sunshine. There was some noise in one of the houses. There a fight broke out between several travelers. One of them provoked his opponents and wanted to continue fighting, and they succumbed to provocations and attacked him. But that warrior easily dodged the sword blows, and grabbing his opponent, he threw him to the ground. At that moment, another one attacked him from behind, but his man quickly noticed it too. Holding the first one by the hand, he threw him to the side and knocked down the second warrior. They were thrown back with such force that they made a hole in the building. He chuckled that he hadn't even had time to warm up yet. Others chuckled that some worms were disturbing their feast, and everyone agreed, so no one could stop them. Another of their friends was fishing outside. He was asked if his training had gone well, but he only asked what was needed from him. Then the man said that there was an order from Desmond. Hearing this, Sam remained silent, and then he took his helmet, and putting it on, he prepared to go on a mission. He also added that it was boring here anyway. Meanwhile, news reached the lands of Bertium, and Ghislaine's father was gloomy. He received a letter that Ghislaine killed Gilmore de Grad, so they will take revenge on him. Then the man ordered the soldiers to be called, but the man was outraged by this accusation. Everyone thought that they were trying to start a war out of thin air, but the Lord continued to try to keep up appearances. Suddenly he heard that people needed a stone. Ghislaine was sure that the vassals had leaked information about the changes, but others were outraged that their vassals had betrayed them. The Lord thought that sometimes even the right thing for the lands can turn into ruin, but it seemed Ghislaine had expected this. The knights said that they had more forces and lands than the de Grads, but then someone burst in on them. Scoven had bad news to deliver. He informed everyone that the enemies were already here. At that moment, someone was approaching their castle, and Sam led the way. Having climbed the wall, everyone saw the enemy army. The lords thought it was a conspiracy, since the enemies appeared here immediately after the declaration of war. Then they reported on the number of troops and their weapons. But the difference in strength was so great that everyone began to worry. Then Lord Bertium told everyone to come to their senses. He said that the argument was taking away their time to fight back. Civilians were immediately evacuated. Then he had to announce that the war had begun. As he approached the castle, the man hummed a melody. He said that his son was untalented, but his death allowed the war to start. Count de Grad was impressed by the castle, and then he suggested that Sam go ahead to discuss something with Bertium. Then Bertium turned to his brother and asked what was going on. But de Grad said that his son was killed on these lands. Moreover, he was killed by Bertium's son. He offered Bertium to surrender, and then there would be no bloodshed. Ghislaine watched silently. At that time, the lords were outraged by what was happening. Ghislaine understood that he could not avoid such an outcome, and since they brought siege weapons here, they wanted to destroy them. Suddenly he heard that his father was defending Ghislaine's son, and that was Bertium's final answer. This tone alarmed de Grad for a moment. Sam was impressed that the great general left such an impression. De Grad also expected no less from the Northern Wolf. Afterwards he turned around and told Bertium not to regret it. Standing on the wall, everyone listened to the distant laughter of de Grad. Then the knight asked to give command to him, but others dissuaded them from fighting because the difference in forces was great. The lords raised an uproar, but Bertium remained silent. The chaos made his thoughts confused. Suddenly the war began, and the enemy turned out to be prepared. He didn't understand what to do now. Then Ghislaine said to prepare for a siege. The father looked at him in surprise. Ghislaine said that the difference in strength was more than twofold. And when the siege weapon is ready, the enemy will strike with all its might. Ghislaine said that their best bet was to call for help and hold on. Father said that even if that were the case, it was unclear what to do next. This made Ghislaine chuckle slightly, and he whispered something to his father. He didn't answer and just looked at his son in surprise. Ghislaine was betting everything on the situation changing radically. He decided to discuss with his people what to do. However, Jillian was out of ideas. Kaur also became thoughtful, and Valinda couldn't believe that the war had begun. Then Ghislaine decided to indicate what they should do. Ghislaine decided to attack the enemy's supplies before it was too late, but Valinda asked how to do this, because too many eyes were directed at the castle. Then Ghislaine turned to Kauru and Jillian. Kaur said that as Ghislaine had requested, they had stationed troops in the forest in advance, and the cloaks of Entdirus bark that they had requested were already ready. Ghislaine said that small units in camouflage could easily carry out sabotage, but he told Valinda that they didn't know where the supplies were kept, and he wanted her to find out their situation. The girl was surprised by this task, but she agreed almost immediately. Infiltrating the enemy's ranks was dangerous, but Ghislaine believed that Valinda could handle it. Now they only had one small thing left to do, namely, to play a trump card that will end the war. A few days later, the people of de Grad rejoiced at the start of the war. The camp where the supplies were located was located in the rear, and the commanders were happy with their position. One of them was happy that he would soon receive part of these lands. Then someone started approaching the camp, and they arrived there on time. Everyone noticed that it was cloudy and nothing could be seen. Ghislaine agreed that everything was perfect for their attack. He ordered not to take prisoners and to kill everyone. Soon the sound of footsteps was heard from the forest. Before the guards had time to come to their senses, horsemen approached them, and they were instantly killed. The remaining soldiers in the camp immediately prepared for battle, but before they could do anything, they were killed. Then Ghislaine shouted again that they should not stand on ceremony with their opponents. Then the Baron was informed that they were under attack. The Baron said not to worry, because they had 1,000 fighters. However, the other one became dejected by these words. In fact, half of them have already been killed. Ghislaine's squad dealt mercilessly with the enemies. This made the man tense. After thinking for a while, he decided to run away, but then his comrade was attacked. Frightened, the man fell to the ground. Valinda immediately recognized Pablo's vassal. The vassal became frightened when he saw the girl. Soon everything was ablaze and the vassal was tied up. Valinda reported that Pablo not only leaked the information, but also led the squad. Then the man began to beg for mercy. Ghislaine asked who bribed him. The man immediately said that it was Desmond, but he also threatened him. Then Ghislaine became convinced that Desmond had handed over the army to the Degrads. Meanwhile, the man kept trying to gain Ghislaine's favor. Dismounting from his horse, Ghislaine told him to raise his head. Then the man was happy and thanked him for the chance. But without saying anything, Ghislaine cut off his head. The man didn't even have time to understand what had happened, and Ghislaine refused to make a deal with him. After all, he believed that traitors deserved only death. Having burned the enemy camp, they prepared to return. Valinda looked at Ghislaine, and Kaur asked what next. Ghislaine ordered to return to the castle. After all, they have most likely already begun to attack them, and if you strike from the rear, it will disrupt the formation and cause chaos. He gave the left flank to Kauru and Valinda, and took the right one for himself. Then he turned to Jillian. He entrusted the enemy's base to him. The man agreed to take it upon himself without any problems. Valinda asked who would take over the main gate, but Ghislain said to forget about it. Nobody understood his answer. Then he silently turned to his comrades and smiled. And he said that this war would open a new chapter in their history. Lord Bertium said to prepare for attack. Crossbowmen came out onto the wall and tried to shoot the enemy. Meanwhile, they had already climbed up the walls. There were many enemies, so everyone engaged in close combat. While the battle was going on, Degrad was amused by what was happening. He decided that the outcome of the battle was clear anyway, and then he said to prepare a second salvo of catapults. Sam also believed that this was the end for the North. At first he doubted it, but now, as he watched, it became obvious to him. After all, Bertium was driven into a dead end. Then someone said that the gates would soon fall too. But the Lord said to forget about the gate and continue to hold the wall. Skoven reported that there would be no reinforcements, since they had enough of their own problems. It was a shame that no one was ready to support them. Suddenly, they were going to report something to Degrad. The soldiers said that their supplies had run out. The supply detachment had not yet returned, so they assumed something had happened. Degrad was surprised that Bertium was able to track down the supply camp. Besides, there was smoke coming from the supply camp, and Sam realized that there was someone smart in Bertium. And this even interested him. Degrad asked what to do, since they no longer had any supplies. But Sam just patted him in the face, and he said that the supplies were no longer needed. Degrad was surprised by the words that by the end of the day, the castle would be theirs. Sam turned silently to the castle. He was experienced and knew how to win. The attack on the flanks had already begun, but the walls were still holding. But no one was holding the central gates. Suddenly he understood everything, and he sent all his soldiers to the assault. He ordered to break through the central gate. He remained in place for some time, and then he called one of his fighters. When Aiden stepped forward, Sam said he would break through on his own, but they should have stayed and held the line. Meanwhile, they continued to climb the wall, but Bertium continued to kill the soldiers. Then Skoven warned the Lord about something. It turned out that siege towers were advancing towards them. Unfortunately, they found that the towers were the same height as the walls. Then Bertium ordered the catapults to be prepared. Their installation has just been completed. They immediately started firing from them to prevent the towers from reaching the walls. The enemy was surprised to see the metal projectile, but before he could reach it, someone shot him down. Bertium was surprised by this. They didn't immediately realize who it was. But then Bertium saw that rider. Looking at him, he couldn't bring himself to believe that it was Sam in front of him. Sam said that the fall of Bertium is inevitable. Then he ordered the ram to be rolled out, and everyone aimed at the gate. Having climbed the tower, the warriors burst onto the castle wall. In the heat of battle, the father began to place his hopes on Ghislain. Several soldiers stood at the gate and guarded it. The magicians were tied up in the meantime. Alfoy demanded that they be released, because they did not want to give up their lives. But the knight told them to sit still. Alfoy objected that letting the ram get so close would mean certain death. Despite his screams, Vanessa remained calm. Then she told him not to worry, and she promised that Ghislain would sort everything out. But Alfoy didn't believe her and told her not to even mention that idiot. But the more she tried to calm him down, the more Alfoy got angry. Vanessa calmly said that Ghislain could be trusted. A couple of days ago he taught her magic. However, very little came out. Vanessa was embarrassed and apologetic, but Ghislain encouraged her. Then he called her outside and showed her something. It turned out that some work was being carried out there. Vanessa didn't understand why they buried the runestone. At that moment, Alfoy suddenly approached them, and he asked why Ghislain was making them dig. Then Gordon intervened and told the guy not to chat while he was working. Vanessa was surprised by all this, but Ghislain said that this was preparation. He understood that in that battle the gates would still fall, but he still realized that they could win. Vanessa listened to him with incomprehension, and then she guessed what Ghislain was planning to do. In fact, she wasn't sure if she could handle it. However, Ghislain had high hopes for her.